I don't understand.
Everything appears to be in order here. Don't worry, ma'am, it's all handled. Can I see the legal property owner?
That'd be me.
He's not the owner. I am. The documents are not in order, ma'am.
No, that's not right. This is ours. You can't do this to her. I'm truly sorry, but this is the official notice.
No, it can't be real. Look at this signature. What is it? What does it say?
He wouldn't do this to me. I wish there was another way.
The city inspector stood in my driveway holding a folder while my son stepped out of my garage as if he owned the place. "I need to speak with the legal property owner," the inspector said. Michael barely hesitated. "You're looking at him." I felt something inside me go cold. "No," I said quietly. "You're not." My son turned toward me, his face suddenly pale. The inspector looked down at his paperwork, then back at me. "Mrs. Simmons, I need to ask you something very important. Did you authorize your signature on this document?" I stared at the page he held out. The signature looked exactly like mine, but I had never signed it. Before I tell you how my own garage became the center of a betrayal I never saw coming, tell me what you would do if your adult child started treating your home as if it already belonged to them. If this story speaks to you, please like and subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. 8 months before that city inspector stood in my driveway holding a document with my name on it, my garage was still just a garage. At least that was what I believed. My name is Elena Simmons. I was 68 years old, retired widowed and living in the same red brick house in Richmond, Virginia, where my husband Thomas and I had raised our 2 children. Thomas had been gone for 3 years by then. Some people told me 3 years was enough time to move forward, as though grief were a train station and I had somehow missed my departure. But anyone who has loved someone for more than 40 years knows better. You do move forward eventually. You learn how to grocery shop for one. You stop reaching for the second coffee mug every morning. You learn which bills your husband used to pay without mentioning them. But certain rooms keep memories in a way photographs never can. For me, that room was the garage. Thomas had never called it a garage. He called it his workshop. It was a detached 2-car structure behind our house connected to the driveway by a narrow strip of concrete that ran beside my hydrangeas. One side had once held our family car. The other was Thomas's kingdom. His old wooden workbench still stood beneath the back window. He had built that bench himself sometime in 1987 using lumber left over from a neighbor's deck project. The surface was scarred by saw blades, drill bits, spilled paint, and 4 decades of ordinary life. His measuring tape still hung from a nail. There were coffee cans filled with screws he had sorted by size, though I could never understand his system. A faded Richmond Braves baseball cap rested on a shelf above the vise. His fishing rods leaned in one corner, and 3 plastic tubs held Christmas decorations we had collected over the years. I had not changed much after he died. Maybe I should have, but I wasn't ready. Sometimes on Sunday afternoons, I would walk into that garage just to smell the cedar shavings that still seemed trapped in the wood. Thomas had been a carpenter for most of his life. Not the glamorous kind people put on television. He repaired porches, installed cabinets, rebuilt staircases, replaced rotten window frames, and somehow always came home with sawdust in his hair. Our son Michael had inherited his hands. That was what Thomas used to say. "He sees how things fit together." He told me once when Michael was 12 and had taken apart a broken kitchen chair without asking permission. Problem is, he also thinks he knows better than everybody else. Thomas had laughed when he said it. At 12, that stubbornness had seemed almost charming. At 39, it was becoming harder to ignore. Michael owned a small custom cabinetry and renovation business called Mason Ridge Interiors. The name sounded much bigger than the business actually was. He had 4 regular employees, 2 work vans, and enough confidence for a company 10 times the size. When business was good, he talked about expanding into high-end kitchen renovations. When it was bad, he blamed suppliers, interest rates, contractors, who paid late homeowners, who changed their minds, or whatever else happened to be closest. But Michael worked hard. I never denied that. And I was proud of him. Maybe that was part of the problem. The first request came on a Wednesday evening in early October. I remember because I had just pulled a chicken casserole from the oven when his truck appeared in my driveway. Michael usually called before coming over. That night he didn't. He walked into the kitchen wearing work boots and a gray company sweatshirt, kissed my cheek, and lifted the lid from the casserole dish. "Smells good. You're lucky I made too much. You always make too much." "For exactly this reason." He grinned and sat down. For half an hour, everything felt normal. He told me about a kitchen renovation in Short Pump. I complained about the grocery store rearranging every aisle. We talked about his wife Jenna and their daughter Sophie, who had just started middle school. Then Michael became quieter. He pushed a piece of broccoli around his plate. I knew that look. "What do you need?" I asked. His head lifted. "Why does everybody think I need something?" "Because you finished dinner before asking." He laughed. Then he sighed. "I lost my storage unit." "What happened?" "The landlord sold the building. New owner wants everybody out by the end of the week." I set down my fork. "What about your equipment?" "That's the problem." Michael explained that he had rented a small warehouse unit on the south side of Richmond for almost 2 years. He stored cabinet doors, lumber hardware, portable saws, and unfinished pieces there between jobs. The sale had apparently happened quickly. "They gave us 30 days, he said. "But I've got nowhere to put half this stuff. Can't you rent another unit? I'm looking?" That should have been the end of it. But Michael glanced toward the kitchen window. From where he sat, he could see the roof of the garage. Then he looked back at me. "Actually, Mom, I wanted to ask you something." There it was. I folded my hands on the table. What could I use Dad's garage for a couple weeks? My first reaction was immediate. I didn't want anyone touching Thomas's things. Michael must have seen something change in my face because he raised both hands. "Not the workshop side. I won't touch Dad's stuff. It's all his stuff. You know what I mean." I did. The right side of the garage was mostly empty, except for lawn equipment, folding chairs, and boxes of old-school records I had been meaning to sort. Michael leaned forward. "I just need temporary storage. 2 weeks, maybe 3 at the absolute most. I've already got a commercial place I'm looking at." "What kind of things?" "Cabinet boxes, some lumber, tools. Nothing crazy." I hesitated. Michael softened his voice. "Mom, I'm not asking to move the company in." I wish I had remembered those exact words sooner. At the time, I smiled. "I know." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I just need somewhere to breathe for a minute. There are certain sentences adult children know will unlock their mothers." Michael had found mine. Somewhere to breathe. I knew what it felt like to be overwhelmed. Thomas and I had lived through layoffs, medical bills, a leaking roof, and one terrifying year when we had less than $800 in savings. Family helped family. That was how I had been raised. And Michael wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking to move into my house. He wanted to use an empty section of a garage for 2 weeks. At least that was how he presented it. "All right," I said. His face brightened immediately. "Really? 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And don't move your father's workbench." "I won't. Or his tools. I promise. And I still need to get to the Christmas decorations." "Mom, I'm serious. You'll have access to everything." I nodded. "All right then." He stood, walked around the table, and hugged me. "You're saving me." I remember those words too. "You're saving me." At the time, they made me feel useful, important, needed. The next morning, I heard diesel engines outside before 8. When I opened my front curtains, there were 2 white Mason Ridge Interiors vans in the driveway. Behind them was a rented box truck. I stepped onto the porch in my robe. Michael jumped down from the passenger side. "Morning, Mom." I stared at the truck. "I thought you said cabinet boxes." "That's mostly what it is." The back door rolled open. It was not mostly cabinet boxes. There were stacks of lumber, metal shelving, tool chests, portable saws, folding work tables, paint supplies, hardware bins, extension cords, compressors, and enough equipment to make me wonder how all of it had ever fit inside one storage unit. 4 men climbed out of the vans. Michael pointed toward the garage. "Right side first, guys." I walked down the driveway. "Michael." He turned. "Yeah, this is more than I expected." He glanced at the truck as though he had never seen it before. "I know it looks like a lot. It is a lot, but we'll organize it. One of his employees carried a large black tool chest past me. Another followed with bundles of trim. Where are you putting my lawnmower? We'll move it to the shed. I don't have a shed. Michael paused. Then he smiled. Okay, we'll figure that out. I should have stopped everything right there. Instead, I stood in my driveway while strangers carried my son's business into my husband's garage. At first, Michael kept his word about Thomas's workbench. Nothing was touched. He carefully stacked boxes along the opposite wall. He even covered Thomas's fishing rods with an old moving blanket so they would not get damaged. That small gesture reassured me. See, I told myself. He respects the space. This is temporary. By noon, the garage looked completely different. There was barely a walkway between the equipment. Michael seemed pleased. See, fits better than I thought. I looked around. You said 2 weeks. He laughed. You worried I'm moving in? Yes. Mom, I have a house. You know what I mean. He put an arm around my shoulders. 2 weeks. Then he kissed the top of my head the same way he had since he was a teenager. And I believed him. That afternoon, the trucks left. The garage became quiet again. I walked inside alone. Thomas's workbench was still there. His baseball cap was still on the shelf. His measuring tape still hung from the nail. Everything important seemed untouched. Still, the room felt different. Crowded. Occupied. I told myself that discomfort was selfish. Michael needed help. I had space. What kind of mother would make her son spend thousands of dollars he didn't have when she had an empty garage? So I ignored the uneasiness. For the first week, nothing happened. Then one Monday morning, I woke to the sound of a power saw. I sat upright in bed. The noise stopped, then started again. I looked at the clock. 7:14 a.m. I put on my robe and walked toward the kitchen window. The garage door was open. 2 of Michael's employees were standing inside. One man held a sheet of plywood. The other was cutting it on a portable table saw. Michael's truck was nowhere in sight. I stepped outside. Excuse me. Both men turned. The younger one smiled. Morning, Mrs. Simmons. What are you doing, just cutting a couple panels? Where's Michael? He's at the Hanover job. I stared at them. One of the men seemed to realize something was wrong. He said it was okay for us to work here. Work here, not store things. Work. I looked beyond them at the crowded garage. A folding table had been set up near the wall. Coffee cups sat beside a box of screws. Someone had plugged extension cords into my outlets. A small radio played country music from one of the shelves. The space no longer looked like temporary storage. It looked like the beginning of something else. I called Michael immediately. He answered on the 4th ring. Hey, Mom, your employees are in my garage. Yeah, just for an hour. You never asked me. There was a pause. Then he gave a small laugh. Mom, they're just cutting 2 panels. You said storage. I know. You said 2 weeks. I know. And you said you weren't moving your business here. I'm not. I looked through the open garage door at 2 men working beneath my husband's old fluorescent lights. What would you call this? Michael sighed. That sigh irritated me more than I expected. It was the sound people make when someone else is being unreasonable. Can we not turn this into a big thing? I'm asking you a question. They needed access to the tools. That's it. And tomorrow they'll be somewhere else. I wanted to argue. Instead, I said, you should have asked. You're right. His apology came quickly. Too quickly. You're right, Mom. I should have called. I'm sorry. That softened me again. All right. I'll make sure it doesn't become a habit. Please do. I love you. I love you too. When the call ended, I stood beside the garage watching those men work. I had no idea that within a few months, there would be employees coming every morning, delivery trucks blocking my driveway, new wiring inside my walls and paperwork downtown, claiming I had approved all of it. At that moment, I still believed my biggest problem was that my son had stretched storage into a little occasional work. I had not yet understood the most dangerous part. Michael had asked for 2 weeks, but somewhere in his mind he had already begun making plans for much longer. The 2 weeks passed, then the 3rd week, then the 4th, and somehow every time I looked toward the garage, there seemed to be more of Michael's business inside it, than there had been the day before. At first the changes were small enough that I could explain them away. A stack of cabinet doors appeared beside the wall. Then 6 long boards were leaned against the back corner. Then a metal shelving unit showed up. When I asked about it, Michael told me it was only there so he could keep things organized. That almost made me laugh. Organized. The garage looked less organized every day. Boxes were stacked along both sides. Plastic bins filled with hinges, drawer pulls, screws, and brackets covered the floor beneath the windows. Rolls of protective plastic stood upright beside Thomas's old fishing rods. A compressor sat where my folding lawn chairs used to be. My lawn mower had been pushed behind the workbench. I could still reach it, but only if I moved 2 boxes first. One Saturday morning, I went out to get the artificial wreath I always hung on my front door before Thanksgiving. The Christmas decorations were stored in blue plastic tubs near the back wall, or at least they used to be. Now I could barely see them. Michael had stacked unfinished cabinet frames in front of them. I called him. "Where are my Christmas boxes?" "Still there. I can see that." "Then what's wrong? I can't get to them." He was quiet for a second. "I'll come move everything tomorrow. I need the wreath today." "Mom, I'm in the middle of a job, so am I supposed to climb over cabinets?" He laughed, not cruelly, but lightly, as though the whole thing were too small to deserve my frustration. "Don't climb over anything. I'll send somebody." 30 minutes later, one of his employees arrived. A young man named Caleb. He apologized several times while moving the cabinet frames. "It's okay," I told him. But it wasn't. That was the first time I realized I had begun needing permission or assistance to reach my own belongings. Still, I said nothing to Michael. I carried the wreath into the house and hung it on the door. That evening I stood on the porch looking at it and felt foolish for being upset. It was just a garage. That was what I told myself. Just a garage. But Thomas had understood something I was only beginning to learn. Sometimes the thing itself is not the problem. The problem is what the thing represents. About a week later, I came home from the grocery store and found a locksmith's van parked in my driveway. I stopped halfway up the sidewalk. A man was kneeling beside the garage door. Michael stood next to him. "What happened?" Michael looked over. "Nothing." "Then why is there a locksmith here?" He pointed toward the garage. "I'm changing the lock." I stared at him. "Why?" "Because there's probably $20,000 worth of equipment in there now." There were several things wrong with that sentence. The first was $20,000, the second was now. But what bothered me most was the way he said I'm changing the lock, not can I not. "Would you mind?" He had already decided. "You didn't ask me." Michael's expression tightened. "I didn't think this was something I needed to bother you with. It's my garage. I know that. Then why wouldn't you ask before changing the lock?" He exhaled through his nose. "Because I'm trying to protect my equipment." The locksmith glanced between us and suddenly became very interested in his toolbox. I folded my arms. "Do I still have a key?" "Of course. You should have told me. You're right." Again the quick apology. Again that tone that said the conversation should now be over. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a new key. "There." I looked at it resting in my palm. Something about receiving a new key to my own garage made my stomach tighten. I should not have needed Michael to give me access to something I owned. But I placed the key on my ring, and once again I let the moment pass. That became the pattern. Michael would do something first. I would object. He would explain why it was necessary. Then he would apologize just enough to make me feel unreasonable for continuing to be angry. A few days later, I noticed Thomas's old cardboard boxes beside the fence. They were covered with a blue tarp. My heart dropped. I went outside and pulled one corner back. Inside were old hand tools, fishing supplies, and several wooden picture frames Thomas had meant to repair. I immediately called Michael. "Why are your father's things outside?" "They're protected." "That isn't what I asked. I needed the shelf. You promised you wouldn't move his things. I didn't throw anything away." "That's not the point." "Mom, they were taking up space." The sentence struck me harder than it should have. Taking up space. Thomas had spent more hours in that garage than anywhere else except our home. And now the things he left behind were being treated like clutter because Michael needed another shelf. Bring them back inside. There was silence. Then Michael said, I don't have room right now. I gripped the phone tighter. Then make room. He must have heard something in my voice because his tone changed. Okay. Today. Okay. When I checked that evening, the boxes were back inside. But they were not where they had been. Michael had stacked them underneath Thomas's workbench. I told myself that was good enough. By December, Michael's employees were arriving regularly, not every day, but often enough that I began recognizing their vehicles. Caleb drove an old silver pickup. Another employee. Marcus drove a red Honda. Sometimes they arrived before Michael. Sometimes Michael never came at all. They used the garage to cut panels, assemble drawer boxes, organize hardware, and load the vans. The sounds became part of my mornings. Saws, drills, men calling measurements to one another, the slam of van doors, the scrape of lumber across concrete. At first, I closed my kitchen window and ignored it. Then one morning, my neighbor Margaret stopped me while I was bringing in the mail. Margaret had lived across the street for nearly 20 years. She was 71, recently retired from a dental office, and knew almost everything that happened on our block without ever seeming nosy. She glanced toward my driveway. Michael's business doing well, I suppose so. Seems busy. Her tone was careful. I knew Margaret. That meant she wanted to say something else. What is it? She smiled awkwardly. Oh, nothing. Margaret. Well, she lowered her voice. I just wondered if he'd rented your garage. No. Oh, he's storing equipment there temporarily. Margaret looked toward the open garage door. At that exact moment, a power saw screamed to life. She raised one eyebrow. Temporary storage. I felt heat rise into my face. He's had some scheduling problems. I understand. She did not sound judgmental. That somehow made it worse. Then she said Bill mentioned the trucks have been waking him some mornings. Bill lived 2 houses down and worked nights as a security guard. I'm sorry. Oh, honey, I'm not blaming you, but I felt blamed anyway. Not by Margaret, by myself. I promised I would talk to Michael. That evening I did. He was standing in the garage looking at measurements on a cabinet door. Michael, 1 second. He marked something with a pencil. Okay. What the vans are waking the neighbors. He frowned. Which neighbors? That doesn't matter. It kind of does. Margaret said Bill has complained about the morning noise. Michael rolled his eyes. Bill complains when somebody closes a trash can too loudly. That doesn't mean he's wrong. We don't start before 7. This is a residential neighborhood. I know where I grew up, Mom. His sarcasm irritated me. I don't want people working here every morning. They're not. They were here 4 days this week. It's a busy month. You said storage. Michael put down his pencil. I know what I said. Do you? His face changed. For the first time I saw real irritation instead of mild defensiveness. What exactly do you want me to do? I want you to use the garage for what I agreed to. We're barely doing anything here. You're running saws, sometimes. You have employees coming and going. Sometimes. There are deliveries. Because the materials need somewhere to go. And how long is this supposed to continue? Michael rubbed his forehead. I'm looking for a place. You told me that 2 months ago. Commercial rent is insane right now. That doesn't make this your workshop. I never said it was. Before I could answer, Caleb walked through the side door carrying a long extension cord. Where do you want this? Michael pointed toward the wall. Leave it by the new outlet. I turned. The what? Caleb froze. Michael's eyes closed for half a second. I walked toward the wall. There, mounted beside the old electrical panel, was a clean metal box with new conduit running upward. I had never seen it before. What is that? Michael followed me. It's nothing dramatic. Then tell me what it is. A small electrical upgrade. My stomach dropped. You changed the wiring. We added a circuit. You added a circuit to my garage. The tools were tripping breakers. I stared at him. You had electrical work done without asking me. It was done professionally. That is not the point. I paid for it. That is not the point either. His voice rose. Then what is the point? The point is that this is my property. The garage went quiet. Caleb looked away. Michael stared at me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he lowered his voice. Mom, I'm improving it. I did not ask you to improve it. You're acting like I tore down a wall. I'm acting like you changed something in my house without permission. It's a garage. There it was again. Just a garage. I looked around. The shelves, the machinery, the stacked lumber, the employees, the new lock. My husband's belongings pushed into corners, and now new wiring inside the wall. When had all of this happened? Not in one dramatic moment. That was the part I could not stop thinking about. If Michael had arrived one morning and announced, I'm turning your garage into my business, I would have said no. But he had not done that. He had asked for storage, then added one little thing, then another, then another. Each change was just small enough that objecting made me feel difficult. Until suddenly I was standing in a room I owned that no longer looked like mine. Michael stepped closer. I'm trying to keep my company alive, and I'm trying to understand why you think that gives you the right to make decisions about my property. I don't think that. Then start acting like you don't. He looked hurt. That hurt me too, because despite everything, he was still my son. I could still see the little boy who used to follow Thomas around carrying a plastic hammer. Michael nodded. Okay. I waited. I'll talk to the guys. Less work here. Less noise. And no more changes without asking. Fine. Michael. I said fine. He gathered his papers. Then he left without hugging me. I stood alone in the garage after everyone was gone. The winter light coming through the windows was fading. I walked over to Thomas's workbench and ran my fingertips across the worn wood. Above it, his old measuring tape still hung from the nail. For some reason, seeing it there made my throat tighten. Thomas had always measured twice before cutting anything. Once you cut it, he used to say, you can't pretend you didn't. I wished relationships came with measurements that clear. I wish there were a mark telling you exactly when helping became enabling, exactly when patience became permission, exactly when someone you loved had crossed a line. I turned toward the new electrical box. At the time, I thought it was simply another boundary Michael had ignored. I did not yet understand that installing it had required paperwork. And paperwork, unlike conversations between a mother and her son, left a trail. For 3 days after our argument about the electrical panel, Michael barely called me. That was unusual. Even when we disagreed, he normally sent a text about Sophie asked whether I needed anything from the store or forwarded me some ridiculous video he knew I would pretend not to understand. This time, nothing. I told myself I was relieved. The garage was quieter too. His employees still came by, but not as early, and the power tools were used less often. For the first time in weeks, I thought maybe I had finally gotten through to him. Then Saturday morning came. I was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing a coffee cup when I heard scraping outside. Not sawing, not drilling. Something heavy being dragged. I looked through the window and saw Michael and Marcus carrying a large metal cabinet into the garage. I dried my hands and went outside. What is that? Michael did not stop moving. Storage cabinet. For what hardware? I stared at him. You said no more changes. This isn't a change. You're bringing in more equipment. It's shelving, Mom. You already have shelving. This locks. He set one side down and wiped his forehead. It'll actually make things cleaner. There it was again. The logic. Every decision came packaged as a favor to me. The lock had been for security. The electrical panel had been an improvement. Now another cabinet was supposedly going to make my garage cleaner. Michael, we had this conversation. He looked tired. I know. Then why are you doing this? Because I need somewhere to keep expensive hardware. And that is my problem. The words came out sharper than I intended. Marcus immediately looked uncomfortable. Michael turned toward him. Give us a minute. Marcus nodded and walked toward the van. Michael waited until he was out of earshot. Then he lowered his voice. Do you have to do this in front of my employees? I almost laughed. Do what make me look like I'm taking advantage of you. I stared at him. Michael, I'm asking why you brought another business cabinet onto my property after promising not to make more changes. It's not bolted down. That isn't the point. He threw up his hands. Everything is not the point with you lately. Because you keep avoiding the actual point. And what exactly is that? That you keep making decisions about my garage as if I don't get a say. Michael glanced toward the house, then toward the garage. His mouth tightened. Finally, he said, "Mom, you weren't using it." I felt something inside me go still. What, you weren't using the garage? I knew exactly what he meant, but I wanted to hear him say it again. I wasn't using it. Not really. I looked through the open garage door. Thomas's workbench, my lawn equipment, boxes of family photographs, Christmas decorations, furniture waiting to be repaired. 40 years of ordinary things. I use it. You store things in it. Yes, that's what garages are for. Exactly. He seemed not to notice the contradiction. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. What I mean is, you had all this empty square footage sitting here doing nothing. I'm actually putting it to use. I stared at my son. You're putting my property to use. Yes, but without asking. I did ask. You asked to store equipment here for 2 weeks. He looked away. Things changed. For you. His jaw tightened. Why are you acting like I'm some stranger taking over your house? Because lately you are acting like a stranger who thinks he gets to decide what happens here. That hurt him. I could see it. And because I was his mother, watching him hurt made me want to take the words back. But I did not. Michael walked toward the metal cabinet and rested one hand against it. You know what this would cost me somewhere else. No, $3,000 a month minimum, once you add electricity, security, insurance, everything. That still doesn't make the garage yours. I never said it was mine. Not yet. I would remember that later. He sighed. Look, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm stressed. I've got payroll on Friday, 2 clients who still owe me money, and another contract starting next month. I'm trying to keep things moving. I softened despite myself. That was always the hardest part. Michael's problems were real. He was not inventing the late payments. He was not pretending commercial rent was expensive. His company supported 4 employees and their families. And I knew what Thomas would have said about responsibility. But I also knew Thomas would never have changed another person's property without permission. Then talk to me, I said. Michael nodded. I am talking to you. After you make the decision. He looked down. That time he did not have an answer. I thought the conversation had ended there. It had not. The next evening, Michael and Jenna came over for Sunday dinner. Sophie was with a friend, so it was just the 3 of us. I made pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and cornbread. For the first half hour, we avoided the garage completely. Jenna told me about a difficult client at the dental practice where she managed the front office. Michael talked about a custom kitchen his company was building for a house near the James River. Then Jenna smiled at him. So when does the new equipment arrive? My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Michael looked at her. What equipment? She blinked. The dust system. His expression changed immediately. Jenna. What? I looked between them. What dust system? Michael set down his fork. It's nothing. I almost laughed. Whenever Michael said something was nothing, I had learned to pay attention. What is it? A dust collector. For the garage? For the tools. You ordered more machinery. It's not machinery exactly. Jenna jumped in. It'll make things cleaner, Elena. Less sawdust. I looked at her. Were you planning to ask me before installing it? Michael's shoulders stiffened. It doesn't require major installation. That wasn't my question. Jenna gave me the patient smile people use when they believe they are explaining something obvious. Honestly, it's an improvement. I turned toward her. To what? The garage. My garage. The smile disappeared. Michael leaned back in his chair. Here we go. I looked at him. What does that mean? Nothing. No. Say it. He stared at his plate. Jenna spoke instead. Michael is trying to build something, Elena, and I've supported him. We know. Then what are you trying to say? She hesitated. I just think sometimes families have to make sacrifices for each other. The word sacrifice stayed in the air between us. I felt my face grow warm. What exactly am I sacrificing? Jenna seemed surprised by the question. Space, privacy. Neither of them answered. Access to my own things. Michael shifted in his chair. Mom. Peace and quiet. You're making it sound dramatic. Am I? Jenna put down her napkin. We're not trying to upset you, but you are. We're trying to help Michael's business succeed. I looked directly at her. And why does that require my property? Because you have the space. There it was again. You have it, therefore we may use it. I sat back. So if I had extra money in my bank account, would you take that too because Michael needed it? Jenna looked offended. Of course not. What's the difference? That's completely different. Why? Because this is just a garage. I nearly laughed. Just a garage. Michael picked up his water glass. I don't want to argue. Neither do I. Then can we eat? For a few minutes, nobody said anything. The scrape of silverware against plates sounded unusually loud. Then Michael started talking about one of his clients. Apparently, the customer had changed cabinet colors twice and wanted an island redesigned after the materials had already been ordered. He told the story well. Michael had always been charming when he wanted to be. By the time dessert came out, the tension had eased. I almost convinced myself to let the whole thing go. Then Michael made one careless comment. That was all it took. He was describing a supplier who was supposed to drop off walnut boards the following morning. They can leave them at my shop if I'm not there. I stopped cutting the pie. My shop. The words were so casual that Michael did not even realize what he had said. Jenna did. Her eyes flicked toward me. I set down the knife. Your shop? Michael froze. What, you just called my garage your shop? Oh, come on. No. I'm curious. He shook his head. It was just a figure of speech. A pretty specific one. I work there sometimes. That doesn't make it yours. I know that. Then stop calling it yours. He gave a short laugh. Not because anything was funny. Because he was irritated. Fine. Your garage. Yes. My business in your garage. For now. He looked at me. For now. Something in his tone bothered me. Jenna reached for her coffee. We all know what Michael means. I turned toward her. What does Michael mean? Nothing. But she would not look at me. I let the conversation move on. Dinner ended shortly after that. Michael carried plates to the sink. Jenna helped wrap leftovers. They hugged me at the door. Everything looked normal. But I felt unsettled. 10 minutes after they left, I noticed Jenna's scarf hanging over the back of a dining chair. I picked it up and stepped outside. Their SUV was still at the curb. Michael was loading a container of leftovers into the back. Jenna stood beside the passenger door. I started down the walkway. Then I heard her voice. She was speaking quietly. It's ridiculous. Michael said something I could not hear. Jenna responded louder. You're putting money into that place. You're improving it. I stopped behind the hedge. Keep your voice down, Michael said. I'm just saying, why does she care so much? It's not like she's using the garage. My fingers tightened around the scarf. Then Jenna said the sentence I would remember for the rest of my life. It's going to be yours eventually anyway. I could not move. For one strange second. Everything around me seemed unusually clear. The porch light. The dry leaves along the sidewalk. The cold air against my face. The sound of a car turning somewhere down the block. It's going to be yours eventually anyway. Eventually. There was only one way Michael eventually got my house. I had to die. I know Jenna probably did not mean it that way. Perhaps that made it worse. She said it casually, naturally, as though my death were simply one future administrative step between their current inconvenience and their eventual ownership. Michael was quiet. I waited for him to correct her. I waited for him to say, it's Mom's house. I waited for something, anything. Instead, he said, I know. 2 words, quietly spoken, but I heard them. I know. My heart felt heavier than it had during any argument we had ever had, because suddenly I understood that the garage was not only about cheap storage, at least not in their minds. They had begun looking at my home as part of Michael's future, a future they were already making plans around. I stepped backward before they could see me. I returned to the house carrying Jenna's scarf. I did not call after them. I did not confront anyone that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table long after the dishes had been washed. Thomas's chair was empty across from me. For the first time since he died, I wished desperately that he were there, not because I felt lonely, but because I needed someone to tell me whether what I had heard was as wrong as it felt. I could almost imagine his answer. Thomas had always been gentler than people realized, but he had very little patience for entitlement. Once years earlier, Michael had borrowed Thomas's pickup truck and returned it with an empty gas tank. Thomas made him refill the entire tank before he was allowed to borrow it again. I had thought Thomas was being too strict. He had looked at me and said, "If you teach a person that your generosity has no limits, eventually they stop calling it generosity." At the time, I rolled my eyes. Now sitting alone at 68, those words came back with painful clarity. I looked toward the dark kitchen window. Beyond it, I could barely make out the shape of the garage. My house. My garage. My life. I had spent months worrying that saying no would make me a bad mother. But that night, for the first time, another question frightened me more. What would happen if I never said it? I did not sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Jenna's voice again. "It's going to be yours eventually anyway." Then Michael's answer. "I know." By morning, the words had changed something in me. Not because I suddenly stopped loving my son. I didn't. Love does not disappear that easily, especially a mother's love. If anything, that was what made the situation so painful. I loved Michael enough that I had spent months finding excuses for behavior I would never have accepted from anyone else. He was stressed. He was building a business. Rent was expensive. Employees depended on him. He was Thomas's son. He needed help. Every excuse had been true, and none of them gave him ownership of my garage. After breakfast, I took my coffee to the dining room table and opened a yellow legal pad. For years, whenever I needed to think clearly, I wrote things down. It was an old habit from my days working in the front office of an elementary school. When three parents were arguing, two teachers needed substitutes, and the principal was asking about a missing purchase order. I learned quickly that emotions could make everything feel bigger than it was. Paper made things smaller, specific, manageable. At the top of the page, I wrote garage. Underneath, I made a list. Employees working there, deliveries, new lock, electrical changes, Thomas's belongings moved, business equipment increasing, noise complaints, no clear move-out date. I stared at the list. Seeing it all together made my stomach turn. Each incident had seemed small when it happened. Together they looked like exactly what they were. A takeover. I turned to a clean page. Then I wrote 30 days. The moment I put those words on paper, I felt guilty. That surprised me. Michael was 39 years old. He had a wife, a daughter, a mortgage, employees, vans, clients, and a company. Yet the thought of telling him he could no longer use my garage made me feel as though I were sending a 12-year-old boy out into the cold. I almost crossed out the words. Instead, I circled them. 30 days. That afternoon, I called Michael. "I need you to come by tonight." There was a pause. "Everything okay? We need to talk." Those 4 words sounded more dramatic than I intended. He sighed. "About the garage." "Yes, I've got a late job." "Then come after." "Mom tonight, Michael." Another pause. "Fine." He arrived a little after 7. Alone. That told me Jenna had probably guessed what the conversation was about. Michael entered through the back door without knocking, as he had done most of his life. Normally, that would not have bothered me. That evening, I noticed it. I noticed everything. He found me at the kitchen table with the legal pad in front of me. When he saw it, he gave me a tired smile. "Are we having an official meeting now?" "Yes." The smile disappeared. He pulled out the chair across from me. "What's going on?" I folded my hands. "I want the garage cleared out." He stared at me. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he laughed once softly. "What, you heard me?" "All of it." "Yes." "Why?" That question almost made me lose my temper. But I had spent the day preparing myself for exactly this conversation, because this arrangement is no longer what I agreed to. Michael leaned back. What arrangement? You asked for temporary storage for 2 weeks. And I told you things got complicated. You now have employees working there. Deliveries coming to the house. You changed the lock. You had electrical work done without asking me. You moved your father's belongings. I put them back, after I told you to. He rubbed both hands over his face. So what are you saying? I'm saying you have 30 days to move your business out of my garage. His eyes widened. 30 days. Yes. Mom, that's impossible. It isn't impossible. You have no idea what's involved. Then explain it. He stood up. That worried me. Michael always stood when he felt cornered, as though movement somehow gave him control over the room. I have inventory in there. Materials tied to active jobs, equipment, shelving, tools. I can't just throw everything into a truck and magically find commercial space. You have been looking for commercial space since October. I have been looking. And it's expensive. That doesn't change the deadline. He stared at me. Where is this coming from? I almost told him about the conversation I had overheard with Jenna. But something stopped me. I wanted to see what he would say without knowing that. This is coming from me. Did Margaret complain again? No. Did somebody threaten to call the city? No. Then why now? Because I should have said it sooner. He walked to the counter and back. You realize what you're asking me to do? Yes. No, I don't think you do. Then tell me. He leaned both hands against the table. If I rent a proper commercial space right now, I'm looking at $3,000, maybe $3,500 a month. Then utilities, insurance, security deposits, probably improvements, maybe additional equipment. That is part of running a business. His expression hardened. Thank you for the business lesson. I ignored the sarcasm. You chose to run a business, Michael. I'm trying to support my family. And I supported you by letting me use empty space. I felt my jaw tighten. Stop calling it empty. He looked away. Fine. It mattered to your father. I know. It matters to me. I know. Then act like it. He pushed away from the table. I cannot do this in 30 days. You can start. You don't understand what this could do to me. I said nothing. His voice grew more urgent. I have 4 employees depending on me. 4. Caleb has a baby. Marcus is paying for his mother's medication. What am I supposed to tell them? Sorry, guys. My mother decided the garage was more important. My chest tightened. It was clever. Maybe not deliberately cruel, but clever. He was no longer asking me to think about him. He was asking me to carry the weight of every person who depended on his company. That is not fair. What isn't putting your employees on my shoulders? I'm telling you reality. No. You're trying to make me responsible for your business decisions. He shook his head. You sound like Dad. I went still. Michael immediately realized what he had said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he added quietly, and you know what Dad would say. Yes. He'd want me to succeed. There it was, the sentence that struck deepest. Michael knew exactly how much I missed Thomas. He knew how often I still wondered what Thomas would think about the choices I made. He also knew how proud Thomas had been when Michael started his own company. Michael sat down again. Dad spent his whole life working with his hands. He understood what I'm trying to build. I looked at him. Yes, he did. Then you know he wouldn't want you to shut me down over a garage. My anger came slowly, coldly. Do not use your father that way. Michael blinked. I'm not. Yes, you are. I'm just saying, your father believed in helping family. He also believed in asking permission before taking something that wasn't his. Michael's face changed. I didn't take anything. You took control of the space. It's still yours. Then why am I the one fighting to use it? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I continued. Thomas would have helped you. He probably would have spent every Saturday in there with you if you had asked. But if you had changed his locks, rewired his garage, moved his belongings, and brought employees onto his property without permission, you know exactly what he would have said. Michael looked toward the window. Yes. What would he have said? His voice was quieter. He'd tell me I crossed a line. I nodded. So don't tell me your father would approve. For the first time that evening, the fight went out of him. Michael sat there staring at his hands. After a while he said, "I'm scared." That changed the room. Not the facts, but the room. I waited. He rubbed his thumb against the edge of the table. "I'm behind on 2 accounts. How far behind? A lot. How much? I don't want to get into numbers." "Then don't." He looked exhausted now. Older than 39. "There's a contract coming up in January," he said. "A big one. If I get through the next couple months, I can stabilize everything. You didn't tell me things were that bad. I didn't want you worrying." I almost smiled at the irony. Instead I said, "You could have asked me for more time. I thought I had more time. You thought you could stay indefinitely." He did not answer. That was answer enough. Michael leaned forward. "Can you give me 90 days, number mom?" "No. 3 months. That's all I'm asking. You already asked for 2 weeks. This is different." "No. It's the same request with a larger number." He looked frustrated again. 60. I hesitated. I hated that I hesitated. But I did. 60 days would put him into the beginning of February. It would give him time to complete the large contract he kept talking about. It would also give him enough time to arrange a proper space without being able to claim I had sabotaged him overnight. I took a breath. 60 days. His shoulders dropped with relief. "But there are conditions." He looked up. "No new equipment." "Okay. No modifications." "Fine. No electrical work, no construction, no new locks, nothing." "Okay. And employees only when absolutely necessary." Michael hesitated. "How am I supposed to define absolutely necessary? You're smart. Figure it out." He almost smiled. "Almost." I continued. "And at the end of 60 days the business is gone." "Understood. I mean it." I said understood. "Michael." He finally looked directly at me. "Yes. 60 days." I nodded. For the first time that evening I felt my shoulders relax. Then he reached across the table. "I'm sorry." I studied his face. "For what?" "For letting this get out of hand." The answer was better than his usual quick apology. I wanted to believe it. "I should have asked before the electrical work," he continued. "And the lock. And I shouldn't have moved Dad's things." "No, you shouldn't have." "I know." He squeezed my hand. "I'm trying, Mom. So am I." That was the truth. He stood to leave. At the back door he turned. "No more changes." I pointed at him. "I'm holding you to that." He nodded. "Deal." After he left, I sat alone for several minutes. I felt relieved. Not happy, but relieved. For the first time we had an actual deadline. 60 days. I wrote the date on my legal pad and underlined it twice. I thought that was the beginning of getting my garage back. The next morning at 9:17 the doorbell rang. When I opened the front door, a man in a brown work jacket stood on my porch. Behind him, a delivery truck blocked half the driveway. "Delivery for Mason Ridge Interiors," he said. I stared at the truck. "What are you delivering?" He checked his clipboard. "A commercial dust collection unit." For a second I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. "How large?" He pointed toward the back of the truck. "Crated system, motor ducting filtration assembly, couple £1,000 altogether." My hands went cold. "When was it ordered?" He looked at the paperwork. "About 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks. Before our conversation. Before Michael had promised me no more changes. The driver smiled politely. "Where do you want us to unload?" I looked toward the garage, then back at him. "You don't." His smile disappeared. "Ma'am, you are not unloading that equipment on my property." He glanced at the address. "This is the delivery location." "I understand. We've got a signed purchase order." "I'm sure you do." He seemed increasingly confused. I stepped onto the porch and pulled the door closed behind me. "This property belongs to me. My son does not have permission to install that equipment here." The driver looked toward the truck again. "I probably need to call my dispatcher." "You probably do." He walked away. I stayed on the porch. My heart was pounding, but for once I did not feel guilty. I felt angry. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Michael. I answered. What did you do? No hello. No explanation. Just accusation. I refused the delivery. Mom, that system is already paid for. You promised no more equipment. I ordered it before we talked. Then you should have told me. I can't just cancel something like that. That sounds like something you should discuss with the company. You're being unreasonable. No. I looked at the delivery truck still sitting in my driveway. I'm finally being clear. Michael went silent. Then he said something I would not understand the full meaning of until much later. Fine, I'll handle it another way. He hung up. The truck eventually left. I watched it disappear down the street and thought I had stopped Michael from pushing the boundary again. What I did not know was that the expensive equipment was only one part of the plan he had already set in motion. Because while I was finally thinking in terms of 60 days, Michael had been making decisions as though my garage had become his permanent address. And soon I was going to discover exactly how permanent he intended it to be. 3 days after I refused the dust collection delivery, the garage looked quieter. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made me suspicious. Michael had stopped sending employees there in the mornings. The vans were no longer lined up along the driveway before breakfast. I did not hear saws starting before sunrise or men calling measurements across the concrete floor. For the first time in months, the property felt almost like my home again. Almost. But I had lived long enough to know that sudden peace after an argument does not always mean a problem has been solved. Sometimes it means someone has simply stopped telling you what they are doing. Michael did not mention the delivery again. When I called to ask whether the dust system had been returned, he said, "It's handled. That was all. Handled." I asked where it had gone. Storage. Whose storage? A place I found. That should have been good news. Instead, his vague answers bothered me. Still, I decided not to chase the subject. I had given him 60 days. He knew the conditions. And I was tired of feeling like a detective in my own family. Then the following Tuesday, I came home from the pharmacy and found a flatbed truck parked halfway across my driveway. 2 men were unloading long bundles of maple boards. I stopped my car in the street. For a moment, I simply stared. The driver raised one hand apologetically. "Sorry, ma'am. We'll be out of your way in a minute." I lowered my window. "Who ordered that?" He glanced at the paperwork. "Mason Ridge Interiors." "Of course. Where are you putting it? Garage, I believe." "No." He paused. "No. Nothing goes into that garage until I speak with my son." One of the workers looked at the other. The driver frowned at the invoice. "This is the delivery address we have." I parked and got out. "May I see that?" He handed me the sheet. Near the top in bold letters was Mason Ridge Interiors, Richmond Workshop, 4128 Hawthorne Lane, Richmond, Virginia. My address. Not Michael's home address. Not a temporary delivery location. Richmond Workshop. I read it twice. Then a third time. "When did your company start delivering here?" The driver shrugged. "I've only done this route a few times." "A few times?" He nodded. "Yeah. Lumber cabinet stock. Hardware once, I think." My stomach tightened. "How long?" He flipped through something on his tablet. "Looks like this account has had deliveries here since October." October. That was when Michael had first asked for 2 weeks of temporary storage. I felt suddenly embarrassed, though I had done nothing wrong. "Please take it back." The driver looked uneasy. "Ma'am, there may be a restocking or redelivery fee. That is between your company and my son. Are you the property owner?" "Yes." He studied me for a second, then nodded. "Okay." I watched them reload the boards. As the truck pulled away, I stood in the driveway staring at the garage. I had thought Michael had been improvising. One problem leading to another. Storage becoming occasional work becoming equipment becoming wiring. But the invoice made everything feel different. Richmond Workshop. That was not improvisation. That was a business identity. I went inside and opened my laptop. I typed Mason Ridge Interiors into the search bar. The company website appeared immediately. I had seen it before months earlier when Michael first launched it. Back then, it had been simple. A few photographs of completed kitchens, a phone number, and a short paragraph about craftsmanship inspired by his father. Now it looked much more professional. There was a new logo, customer testimonials, a gallery, a section called Our Workshop. My finger froze on the trackpad. I clicked. The first photograph showed my garage, not from the outside, from inside. The image had been taken from near the entrance, angled toward the back wall. Thomas's workbench was barely visible beneath equipment and stacked materials. Under the photograph were the words, "Our Richmond workshop allows us to build custom cabinetry locally with hands-on quality control from start to finish." I read it slowly. Our Richmond workshop. There were 4 more photographs. Michael standing beside a cabinet frame, Caleb operating a saw, rows of materials stacked against the walls. One photo even showed the new electrical panel. I felt something hot rise into my face. My home had become advertising. My private property was being presented to strangers as company premises. I clicked the contact page. There it was again. 40128 Hawthorne Lane, under business address. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Then I called Michael. He answered cheerfully. "Hey, Mom, why is my address on your website silence?" "Not long, maybe 2 seconds, but long enough. What your business website lists my home as your business address." "Oh, that." The casualness of his voice made my anger sharpen. "Yes, that. It's where we've been working. Temporarily. I needed an address. You have a house. My home address isn't appropriate for the business." I almost laughed. "And mine is, that's not what I mean." "What do you mean?" He exhaled. "Clients need a stable location. Suppliers need a delivery address. It makes the company look established. So you used my house to make your company look established." "Mom, nobody's coming into your house. That is not the point." I was beginning to hate that phrase because I had to repeat it so often. "You never asked me. I didn't think putting the address on a website was a big deal. You didn't think advertising my home as your commercial workshop was a big deal. It's temporary. Then why call it your Richmond workshop?" Another pause. Marketing. The word stunned me. Marketing. "You know how websites work." "I know exactly how websites work." "Then you know sometimes things are phrased a certain way. Do your customers know it is my residential garage? That doesn't matter to them. It matters to me." Michael's patience disappeared. "Mom, you wanted fewer people working there." "Fine." I cut back. "You didn't want the new equipment delivered." "Fine. I moved it somewhere else. What more do you want?" "I want you to stop treating my property like part of your company. I'm leaving in 60 days. Then remove the address today." He sighed. "That's not as simple as you think." "Why?" "Because it's on supplier accounts, business listings, invoices, some contracts." My hand tightened around the phone. "Contracts for customers. You put my address on legal contracts as the company address. Not as anything involving you. How many I don't know. How many, Michael? Several." I stood from the table and began pacing. "Change it. I can't change every active document overnight. You can start today." "Mom." "No. I am done finding out after the fact." He went quiet. Then coldly he said, "Fine." The call ended. But I was not finished. For the first time since this began, I stopped asking only what Michael had told me. I started looking for what he had not. I searched the company name again, business directories, social media pages, contractor listings. My address appeared over and over. Some sites even had a map marker showing exactly where my house was. One listing described the location as local woodworking studio and fabrication facility. Fabrication facility. I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. I thought about all the times I sat at my breakfast table in my robe while strangers pulled into the driveway. All the times I had wondered whether I was being too sensitive. Apparently, strangers on the internet knew more about how my garage was being used than I did. That afternoon, I walked across the street to Margaret's house. She opened the door wearing gardening gloves. "Elena." Everything okay? I need to ask you something. Her face immediately became serious. Of course. Have people on the street been complaining about Michael's business? Margaret hesitated. That told me enough. How many? She removed her gloves slowly. I don't know exactly. Margaret. She sighed. Bill complained to the neighborhood association about the noise. When? A few weeks ago. My stomach sank. Anyone else? The Harrisons were upset about the delivery trucks blocking their mailbox. I closed my eyes. Margaret touched my arm. Nobody is angry with you. They should have told me. They didn't want to embarrass you. That hurt more than anger would have. My neighbors were protecting me from what was happening on my own property. Has anyone contacted the city? Margaret looked uncomfortable. I don't know. That was not a no. I nodded. Thank you. Elena. I'm sorry. Don't be. I walked back across the street. For the first time, I looked at my property from the sidewalk instead of from inside it. The company vans were not there that day. But the marks of Michael's operation were obvious once I knew how to see them. Scratches along the driveway, pallets stacked behind the garage, a pile of scrap lumber beside the fence, a trash container that had not belonged there 6 months earlier. It no longer looked like a son temporarily borrowing his mother's space. It looked like a small business had quietly planted itself behind a private home. The next morning, I decided to photograph everything: the garage exterior, the interior, the wiring, the shelving, the business materials, the website pages showing my address. I did not yet know why I was documenting it. I only knew I wanted a record. Perhaps that old-school office instinct was returning. If something feels wrong, keep copies. Write dates down. Do not rely on memory when paperwork exists. I printed several pages from Michael's website and placed them in a folder. Then I printed the delivery invoice the lumber company had emailed me after I requested a copy. As I was organizing everything, someone knocked on the front door. It was Margaret. She held a folded piece of paper. I almost forgot, she said. This came to my house by mistake yesterday. Bill gave it to me this morning. I took it. The envelope had my address printed clearly. City of Richmond, Department of Planning and Development Review. My heart began beating harder. What is it? Margaret asked. I don't know. I waited until I was inside before opening it. The letter was formal, dry, professional, but 3 phrases seemed to jump directly from the page. Possible unauthorized commercial activity, residential property, property owner response requested. I read the letter twice. Then I reached the section listing reported concerns. Employee traffic, commercial equipment, electrical alterations, potential zoning violations. I lowered the paper. For months, Michael had made me feel as though I were exaggerating. Now the city had put the problem in writing, and the letter was not addressed to Mason Ridge Interiors. It was addressed to me, Elena Simmons, property owner. I was still reading when the back door opened. Michael walked into the kitchen. He had not called first. He looked tired but cheerful. Hey, Mom, I just need to grab some. Then he saw the envelope in my hand. Everything changed. His eyes dropped to the city seal. His face tightened. He stopped speaking. That was when I knew something was wrong beyond the garage itself. Not because the city had sent me a letter, but because my son looked at that letter like he had been hoping I would never see it. Michael's eyes stayed on the envelope in my hand. For half a second, neither of us moved. Then he forced a smile. What's that? I looked at him. You know what it is. His smile disappeared. He stepped closer and reached for the letter. Let me see. I pulled it back. No. His eyebrows lifted. Mom. I said no. That was new for me. Not the word itself, the way I said it. Calmly, without apology. Michael looked almost offended. I'm trying to help. You can help by explaining why the city of Richmond is contacting me about unauthorized commercial activity on my property. He glanced toward the garage, then back at me. It's probably just a complaint. I know it's a complaint. Then there's nothing to panic about. I'm not panicking. He reached for the paper again. This time I folded it and placed it beside my coffee cup. Michael exhaled. Can I at least read it? You can read it after you answer me. Answer what? Why were you worried when you saw the envelope? I wasn't worried. You stopped talking the second you saw the city seal. That doesn't mean anything. It means something. He walked to the refrigerator, opened it, stared inside and closed it without taking anything. That was another Michael habit. When he did not want to answer a question, he moved. He opened drawers, checked his phone, looked for coffee he did not want. Anything to keep from sitting still. Mom, this is probably because Bill complained about noise. The letter mentions electrical alterations. I told you the electrical work was professional. It also mentions potential zoning violations. That's standard language. How would you know? Michael turned around. Because I run a business, and apparently you run it from my house. He rubbed his forehead. We've been over this. No. We have been over what you chose to tell me. I'm beginning to understand there may be a difference. His face hardened. What is that supposed to mean? It means I found my address on your website. I already explained that. And on contractor listings. Same reason. And supplier invoices. Yes. And customer contracts. Yes. I pointed toward the city letter. Now the government is contacting me because of business activity I never authorized. You did authorize me to use the garage. For storage. We're not doing this again. Apparently we are. Michael pulled out the chair across from me and sat down hard. Fine. Let me see the letter. I slid it across the table but kept my fingers on one edge. He read it quickly. Too quickly. He barely seemed interested in the wording. When he reached the bottom, he leaned back. This is nothing. I stared at him. Nothing. It's a preliminary notice. You sound very familiar with it. He ignored that. They're basically asking questions. They're asking me. Because you're the homeowner. Yes. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong. I watched him carefully. What did you file? His eyes lifted. What with the city? Nothing unusual. My stomach tightened. That is not an answer. He pushed the letter back toward me. Mom, businesses file paperwork all the time. What paperwork? Registration stuff. What kind of registration stuff? Permits. Basic compliance. I felt a pulse begin behind my eyes. You filed permits for my property. Not exactly. Then exactly what did you file? Michael's jaw tightened. You're getting worked up over terminology. No, I'm asking a simple question. He stood again. I don't have time for an interrogation. Sit down. He looked at me. For a moment I saw something I had not seen since he was a teenager. Surprise. Not because I had raised my voice. Because I had not. He sat down. I folded my hands. What did you file using my address? He looked toward the window. Some business documents. Did any of them require my permission? Silence. That silence was worse than an answer. Michael. Technically, there are forms where the property owner acknowledges the business use. I felt cold. Technically, it's not as dramatic as it sounds. Did you give the city a document saying I approved your business operating from my garage? He hesitated, then said, there was an owner authorization. I stared at him. I never signed an owner authorization. Michael immediately lifted his hands. Wait. No. You're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I know whether I signed something. You agreed to let me use the garage. That is not the same thing. To the city, they just need proof that the owner knows the business is there. And did you tell them I knew the business was there permanently? I never said permanently. Did you tell them I authorized commercial operations? Michael looked irritated now. Mom, I already handled this. The phrase hit me. Exactly what he had said when the first city notice came up in conversation months later in the outline of events I had not yet understood. Handled. I leaned forward. How did you handle it? He said nothing. Michael. I submitted what they needed. What did you submit? I don't remember every form. Then get me copies. He laughed once. Not because it was funny, because he was cornered. You're seriously asking me to dig through months of business paperwork because some neighbor complained about a saw? Yes. You wouldn't even understand half of it. The room went silent. I looked at him for several seconds. Excuse me? He seemed to realize immediately what he had said. That came out wrong. No. I think it came out exactly the way you meant it. Mom, I spent 36 years working in a school office. I know. I managed purchase orders, payroll records, student files, vendor contracts, insurance forms, budget reports, and enough state paperwork to fill this house. I know that. Then don't sit in my kitchen and tell me I wouldn't understand paperwork connected to my own property. He rubbed both hands over his face. I didn't mean you're stupid. That is fortunate. I mean business permits can be complicated, so explain them. He did not. That frightened me more than anything else he had said. Because Michael loved explaining things. He explained refrigerators to salespeople. He explained football to people who did not watch football. He explained restaurant menus to waiters. If Michael understood something, he wanted everyone in the room to know he understood it. But now when I asked about documents he had filed concerning my own property, he suddenly had nothing to say. I picked up the city letter. There's a phone number here. Michael's face changed. Mom, I'm going to call. You don't need to. I think I do. I told you I handled it. And I'm telling you I want to hear from the city directly. He stood. Please don't create a bigger problem. I looked at him. Those words stayed between us. Create a bigger problem. Not discover. Create. As though the danger was not whatever he had done. The danger was me asking questions about it. What bigger problem, I asked. He stared at me. Then he shook his head. Forget it. No. Tell me. I'm saying bureaucracies make things difficult, that's all. Then if everything is proper, there shouldn't be a problem. Michael grabbed his keys from the counter. I have to go. You came here to get something from the garage. I'll get it later. He moved toward the back door. I stood. Michael. He stopped but did not turn. Did you sign my name to something? His shoulders went rigid. For one terrible second, I thought he was going to answer. Instead, he said, You're making this into something it isn't. Then he left. I heard his truck start less than a minute later. I stood in the kitchen with the city letter in my hand. My heart was pounding. I wanted to call him back. I wanted him to walk through the door, laugh open a folder, and show me some harmless document I had forgotten signing. I wanted to discover that my suspicion was unfair, that I was overreacting, that my son had crossed boundaries but not that boundary. But wanting something to be true does not make it true. I took my coffee to the table and dialed the number on the letter. A woman answered. City of Richmond Planning and Development Review. How may I direct your call? My name is Elena Simmons. I received a notice concerning commercial activity at my home. She asked for the address. I gave it. One moment, please. I listened to soft hold music while staring through the kitchen window. The garage door was closed. From here it looked ordinary. Brick walls, white trim, dark roof. Nothing about the outside suggested how much my relationship with my son had changed inside it. The woman returned. I'm transferring you to zoning compliance. A man answered next. I repeated my name and address. He found the case. Yes, Mrs. Simmons. It appears we have an open review associated with a woodworking and cabinetry business operating at the property. I never approved a business to operate there. There was a pause. I heard typing. Then he said, According to the file, the property owner submitted authorization. My fingers tightened around the phone. I did not. Another pause. Are you Elena Marie Simmons? Yes. And you are the titled owner of 4128 Hawthorne Lane? Yes. I see. His tone changed. Less routine. More careful. I sat straighter. What exactly do you have? I can't make a determination over the phone, but there is an owner consent form in the file. What does it say? It indicates consent for Mason Ridge Interiors to use an accessory structure at the residence for business-related purposes. My mouth went dry. And it has my name, yes. Does it have my signature? The man hesitated. Yes, ma'am. For a moment I heard nothing except the faint hum of my refrigerator. Can you send me a copy? Yes, I can email the public record associated with the application. I would like everything connected to it. There may be additional documents. Send whatever I'm entitled to receive. Yes, ma'am. He took my email address. Before we ended the call, I asked one more question. When was this owner consent form submitted? More typing. October 23rd. I closed my eyes. October 23rd. Less than 2 weeks after Michael first asked whether he could temporarily store equipment in my garage. Not months later when things supposedly got complicated. Not after circumstances changed. Almost from the beginning. Mrs. Simmons. Yes. Is there anything else? I forced myself to speak. No. Thank you. I ended the call. Then I sat there without moving. My son had asked me for 2 weeks of storage. Within days, someone had submitted paperwork telling the city I had authorized business use. I tried to remember October 23rd. What had I been doing? Had Michael brought me anything to sign? Had he slipped a form between papers? Had I signed something without reading it? I was careful with documents, but careful people can still make mistakes. I searched my memory until my head hurt. Nothing. At 2:41 that afternoon, an email arrived from the city. There were 4 attachments. I opened the first. Business registration information. The second showed a site sketch of my garage. The third described proposed business activity. Then I opened the fourth. Owner consent and property authorization. My name appeared at the top. Elena Marie Simmons. My address underneath. Near the bottom was a declaration stating that I understood and approved the described business use of the property, and beneath that declaration was a signature, my signature, or something so close to it that for 3 or 4 seconds I actually doubted myself. I leaned toward the screen, the capital E, the long loop in the S, the strange way I had always crossed the second stroke in Simmons. It looked real, but I knew I had never signed that form. And suddenly the question was no longer whether Michael had taken over my garage. The question was how far he had been willing to go to make that takeover look legitimate. I stared at the signature until the letters stopped looking like letters. Elena Marie Simmons. My name. My handwriting. Or at least something close enough that anyone who did not know me would have believed it. I enlarged the document on my laptop. The signature became grainy around the edges. I leaned closer. There was the capital E. I had used for years with the lower loop slightly smaller than the upper one. There was the long curve of the S in Simmons. Even the final stroke tilted upward the way mine usually did. For one terrible moment I wondered whether I had signed it and forgotten. That thought frightened me almost as much as the document itself. I was 68. I misplaced my glasses sometimes. I occasionally walked into a room and forgot why I had gone there. Like almost every person my age, I had moments when my memory took an extra second to catch up. But I did not forget signing legal paperwork concerning my property. Still, Michael had spent months making me question whether I was overreacting. Maybe I had signed something. Maybe he had explained it badly. Maybe it had been mixed in with another document. I printed the form. Then I carried it to the dining room table. I sat beneath the chandelier Thomas had installed himself and studied every line. The owner consent form was dated October 23rd. That date mattered. Michael had first asked to use the garage around the middle of October. October 23rd would have been less than 2 weeks later. At that point, according to everything he had told me, he was only storing equipment temporarily. So why would I have authorized an ongoing business operation? I opened the calendar on my phone. October 23rd. The date looked familiar. I went to the small desk in my bedroom where I kept household papers. Thomas had always teased me because I saved everything. Receipts, warranty cards, insurance statements, contractor invoices, copies of forms. Somebody could rebuild our entire life from your filing cabinet, he once told me. That habit had seemed old-fashioned after everything became digital. That afternoon I was grateful for it. I pulled open the bottom drawer. Home repairs, taxes, insurance, vehicle records. I searched backward through October. Then I found a folder labeled Windows. Suddenly I remembered. In early October, one of the front windows had developed a leak. I had hired a local company to replace it, but the replacement sash arrived while I was visiting my sister in North Carolina. Michael had offered to pick it up for me so I would not have to pay another delivery charge. The supplier required written authorization because the order was under my name. I had signed a one-page pickup authorization before leaving town. My hands began to tremble. I found my copy. At the bottom was my real signature. I placed it beside the city form. Then I stopped breathing. They were not merely similar. They were identical. Not similar strokes. Not similar handwriting. Identical. The angle. The spacing. The exact upward flick at the end. Even a tiny ink gap in the middle of my last name appeared in precisely the same place. No one signs their name exactly the same way twice. Not perfectly. But these two signatures matched like photographs, because that was exactly what one of them was. A copy. I felt sick. I went back to the computer and scanned both documents. Then I enlarged the signature areas side by side. There was no question. Someone had lifted my signature from the window authorization and placed it onto the owner consent form. I sat back. The room felt suddenly too quiet. There had been times in my life when anger came quickly. When Michael was 16 and lied about where he had been. When a hospital billing office tried charging Thomas twice for the same procedure. When someone backed into my car at a grocery store and drove away. This was different. The anger came slowly because grief arrived first. My own son had taken something as small as my signature and turned it into permission I never gave him. I thought about the evening he first asked for the garage. 2 weeks, maybe 3 at the absolute most. I thought about how he squeezed my hand. You're saving me. Less than 2 weeks later, according to the city record, an authorization carrying my copied signature had been submitted. That meant the deception had not begun after circumstances changed. It had begun while I still believed he was asking for temporary help. I picked up my phone. My first instinct was to call him. I even tapped his name. Then I stopped. What would I say? Did you forge my signature? And what would he say? Probably the same things he had been saying for months. You're misunderstanding. It's not what it looks like. You agreed to let me use the garage. It was just paperwork. Don't make this into something bigger. For once I did not want an explanation before I understood the facts. So I called someone else. Rebecca Hayes. Rebecca had been Thomas's estate attorney. She was in her early 50s, practical, quiet, and impossible to intimidate. Thomas liked her immediately because she never wasted words. After he died, Rebecca had helped me transfer accounts, update property records, and make sure everything that needed to be changed was changed. I had not spoken to her in nearly a year. Her assistant answered. Hayes Legal Group. My name is Elena Simmons. Rebecca handled my husband, Thomas Simmons's estate. There was a brief pause. Yes, Mrs. Simmons. I see your file. I need to speak with her about something involving my property. Is this urgent? I looked at the 2 signatures on the table. Yes. 20 minutes later, Rebecca called me back. Elena. The sound of her voice nearly broke something loose inside me. Rebecca, what happened? I explained carefully. The garage, Michael's business, the city notice, the owner consent form. Then I told her about the signatures. She did not interrupt. When I finished, there was a brief silence. Do you still have the original window authorization? Yes. And the city sent you the other document directly? Yes. Good. Something about the word good startled me. Nothing felt good. Rebecca continued. Do not give either original document to Michael. I wasn't planning to. Do not alter them. Do not write on them. Keep the emails from the city. Save the attachments in more than one place. My heart began beating faster. Rebecca, is this as serious as it feels? I need to review the documents before I give you a legal opinion. That was exactly the sort of answer Rebecca always gave. Precise. Careful. But she continued, if your signature was copied onto a property authorization without your consent, then yes, it is serious. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not from an angry mother. Not from a suspicious neighbor. From an attorney. Should I confront him? No. The answer came immediately. I opened my eyes. No, not yet. Why? Because right now you need records more than arguments. I looked toward the garage through the dining room window. What kind of records? Everything connected to the business use of the property. Emails, texts, invoices, city notices, photographs of modifications. Anything showing what you permitted and what you objected to. I've started collecting some of that. Good. There are pictures on his website. Save them. I printed them. Also save digital copies if possible. I reached for my legal pad. Rebecca continued. Have you signed any lease with Michael? No. Any business use agreement? No. Any written permission for employees to work there? No. Have you accepted rent? Num. Has Michael ever paid you money specifically for the use of the garage? Num. That last question made me realize something. All those months Michael had spoken as though his investment in the garage gave him some claim over it. The shelving, electrical work, locks, equipment. But he had never paid me rent, never offered, never asked for a lease. Because in his mind he did not seem to believe he was borrowing commercial space from someone else. He seemed to believe he was improving something that would eventually belong to him. Rebecca asked, do you have copies of the messages where he originally asked for temporary storage? I'm not sure. Check. I opened my text history while she waited. It took several minutes of scrolling. Then I found it. 3 days after our first dinner conversation, Michael had written, thanks again for letting me use Dad's garage for temporary storage. Promise I'll be out as soon as I find another place. My throat tightened. I found one. Save screenshots. I will. Any messages about the electrical work? I searched again. There was one from the day after our argument. Sorry about not asking first. The electrical work was professionally done. No more changes without talking to you. I read it aloud. Rebecca went quiet for a moment. That is useful. Useful. I almost laughed. It felt strange discussing my relationship with my son as evidence. Rebecca must have heard something in my voice. Elena, documenting what happened does not mean you have decided what to do about Michael. I know. It simply means you are protecting yourself while you decide. Protecting myself. From my son. I looked down at the copied signature again. I never thought I'd need to do that. I know. Her voice softened. But wanting to trust someone and protecting yourself are not opposites. We arranged to meet the following morning. After the call, I spent nearly 3 hours creating a file. I printed the texts, saved screenshots, downloaded images from the company website, copied the supplier invoice showing my address as the Richmond workshop, photographed the electrical panel, photographed the shelving, photographed Thomas's belongings stacked beneath the workbench. Then I returned to the city documents. I read the owner consent form more carefully. The wording was broader than I had realized. It did not merely say Michael could store business materials there. It stated that the property owner acknowledged commercial use of the accessory structure and authorized the applicant to pursue related approvals. I felt betrayed all over again. The following morning, I sat across from Rebecca in her office. She placed the window authorization beside the city form and studied them through reading glasses. After less than a minute, she looked up. These appear to be the same signature image. I swallowed. So I'm not imagining it. No. She pointed to a small break in one ink stroke. See this? I nodded. It's identical. Natural signatures vary. These don't. What happens now? That depends partly on what the city determines and partly on what you want. I want my house back. Rebecca nodded once. Then we begin there. She reviewed the rest of my documents. When she reached Michael's text promising temporary storage, she placed it beside the city authorization. These two records tell very different stories. I understood immediately. One showed what Michael had told me. The other showed what someone had told the city. I looked at Rebecca. Could this cost me my house? No. The certainty in her answer helped me breathe. But unauthorized modifications and commercial operations can create compliance issues. We need to make clear what you did and did not approve. What about Michael? If he submitted this document knowingly, there may be consequences. The word consequences hurt. He's my son. I know. I don't want to ruin his life. Rebecca removed her glasses. Elena, protecting yourself is not the same thing as ruining him. I stared at the folder in front of me. For years I had believed being a good mother meant stepping between my children and consequences whenever help with the down payment. Watch Sophie after school. Let Michael use the garage. But perhaps there were consequences a mother should not prevent. Perhaps preventing them was how small boundary violations became large ones. Rebecca slid the papers back toward me. For now, say as little as possible until the city follows up. Preserve everything. I nodded. And Elena. Yes, if Michael asks you to sign anything from this point forward, call me first. I almost told her Michael would never dare ask. But then I looked at the copied signature. He had already found a way around asking. 2 days later, the city called. The man introduced himself as David Mercer, a code enforcement inspector. He said he needed to visit the property and inspect the garage. Then he added, I also need to clarify ownership and authorization directly with you. When Thursday morning if you're available. I looked at my calendar. I am. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with Rebecca's folder beside me. Michael did not yet know an inspector was coming. For the first time since this had begun, I knew something he did not. And unlike Michael, I had no intention of hiding it forever. I simply wanted the truth to arrive before he had time to rearrange it. Thursday morning arrived cold and clear. I woke before 6, though the inspector was not scheduled to arrive until 9:30. For almost an hour, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My mind kept moving in circles. What if Michael arrived first? What if he tried to explain everything away? What if the inspector believed him? What if I had somehow misunderstood the form? Then I reminded myself of the 2 signatures. Identical. Not similar. Identical. That fact steadied me. By 7, I was dressed. By 7:30, I had made coffee I barely drank. At 8, I placed Rebecca's folder on the dining room table. Inside were copies of Michael's original text asking for temporary storage photographs of the garage, screenshots from the company website, supplier invoices, the city authorization form, and the old window pickup document carrying the signature that had apparently been copied. I did not tell Michael the inspector was coming. Rebecca had advised me not to create an unnecessary confrontation beforehand. If the city needs to speak with the owner, she had said, let them speak with the owner. So that was what I intended to do. At 9:15, I heard a van pull into the driveway. My heart jumped. I went to the front window. It was not the city. It was Michael. Of course it was. He climbed out carrying a travel mug and talking on his phone. A few seconds later, he disappeared into the garage. I stood frozen behind the curtain. Had someone warned him? Or was this simply one of the mornings he stopped by? Unexpectedly, I considered calling Rebecca. Then I stopped myself. I could handle a conversation. I had spent too much of my life avoiding discomfort because I wanted everyone else to remain comfortable. Not that morning. I stepped outside. Michael was inside the garage checking something on a cabinet frame. He glanced over. Morning. Morning. You're up early. It's almost 9:30. He looked at his watch. Right. There was something strange about his tone. Not suspicious exactly. Distracted. I leaned against the garage entrance. What are you doing here, checking materials before the guys pick them up? Today, yes. He looked at me. Why no reason? For a moment, I felt guilty withholding information. Then I remembered how many things Michael had decided I did not need to know. I did not owe him advance notice of an inspector coming to my property. At exactly 9:32, a white city vehicle pulled into the driveway. Michael turned at the sound. I watched his face. Recognition came immediately. Not of the man, of the vehicle. His expression changed. What is that, the city inspector? His head snapped toward me. You called them? No. They contacted me. Why didn't you tell me? Because they asked to speak with me. Michael set down the measuring tape in his hand. Mom, this is exactly what I meant about making things worse. I felt the old instinct to defend myself rise. Then I let it pass. I didn't create this inspection. The driver's door opened. A man in his late 40s stepped out wearing dark work pants, a navy jacket, and an identification badge clipped to his chest. He carried a folder and a tablet. He walked toward us with the polite, slightly guarded expression of someone who spends his days arriving at properties where people are rarely happy to see him. Good morning. Michael stepped forward before I could. Morning. Michael Simmons. Mason Ridge Interiors. He extended his hand. The inspector shook it. David Mercer, City of Richmond. Michael nodded quickly. Yeah, I figured. I've actually been meaning to call someone about the notice. There's been some confusion. David glanced at the garage, then at Michael. I'm here regarding the property at 4128 Hawthorne Lane. That's right. I need to speak with the legal property owner. Michael did not hesitate. You're looking at him. The words landed exactly the way they had in my nightmares since Rebecca told me an inspection might happen. I stared at my son. David looked down at his tablet. Michael Simmons. Yes. David tapped the screen. Then he looked up again. Our property records show the titled owner as Elena Marie Simmons. Michael's confidence flickered. For all practical purposes, I manage the property. David's expression remained neutral. That wasn't my question. Michael shifted. I'm family. I understand. Are you the legal owner? There was a pause. Michael glanced toward me. Then, as though saying it confidently enough might somehow change the record, he said yes. Something inside me broke free. No. Both men turned. My voice had not been loud, but it was firm. No, you are not. Michael's face drained of color. Mom. I stepped forward. My name is Elena Simmons. I own this property. David looked from Michael to me. Mrs. Simmons. Yes. Can I confirm your identification, of course? Michael started speaking. She owns it on paper, but David held up one hand. Sir, please let me finish with the property owner. Sir. The word was perfectly polite. But Michael reacted as if someone had slapped him. For months, he had controlled every conversation about the garage because he knew more about the business than I did. Now someone with actual authority was refusing to let him speak for me. I went inside, retrieved my driver's license, and handed it to David. He checked it against his tablet. Thank you. Then he opened his folder. I need to clarify a few things before I conduct the physical inspection. All right. Michael stepped closer. I can explain the business setup. David looked at him. I may have questions for you in a moment. Michael pressed his lips together. David turned back to me. How long has Mason Ridge Interiors operated from this structure? I took a breath. My son asked me in October if he could temporarily store business equipment here for approximately 2 weeks. David glanced down at his notes. Did you authorize employees to work from the garage? No. Michael interrupted. That's not completely accurate. David turned. I'll give you a chance to respond. But she knew people were here. I said I'll give you a chance to respond. Michael looked furious. I continued. I discovered employees working here after they had already started. I objected. He later continued using the garage for business purposes. David wrote something down. Did you approve electrical modifications? No. Did you approve installation of new commercial equipment? No. Did you enter into a lease with Mason Ridge Interiors? Number, did you accept rent? Number, did you authorize this property to be advertised publicly as the company's Richmond workshop? Num. Michael laughed sharply. This is ridiculous. I looked at him. He looked away. David closed one section on his tablet. All right. Then he removed a document from the folder. Even before he turned it toward me, I recognized it. The owner consent form. My stomach tightened. David's voice remained calm. Mrs. Simmons, I need to ask you about this. He held it where both Michael and I could see it. Michael went completely still. David pointed to the bottom of the page. This document was submitted with the business use application associated with this property. Yes, it contains your printed name. Yes, and a signature. Yes. David looked directly at me. Did you sign this form? No. Michael inhaled. David immediately turned toward him. Please do not answer for her. Michael's jaw clenched. David looked back at me. Mrs. Simmons, did you authorize someone else to sign it for you? No. Did you give verbal permission for your signature to be placed on this document? No. Did you previously sign a similar form that might have been reused? No. I hesitated. Then I added, but I believe I know where the signature came from. Michael's eyes moved toward. For the first time that morning, I saw fear. Not frustration, not annoyance. Fear. David asked, Can you explain? I went inside and returned with Rebecca's folder. Michael stared at it. What is that? I ignored him. I removed the original copy of the window authorization and held it beside the city form. This document is from October. I signed it so my son could pick up a replacement window while I was out of town. David took both sheets. I pointed to the signatures. They are identical. He studied them. Michael spoke quickly. This doesn't prove anything. I turned toward him. You told me you did not remember what paperwork you filed. I said I didn't remember every form. You also told me I agreed to the business use. You did. No. I agreed to storage. You knew we were working here. After you had already begun. David raised one hand. I understand there's a family disagreement here, but I need to keep this focused. Family disagreement. I almost wanted to correct him. This was no longer a disagreement. A disagreement was whether the garage should be painted white or gray. This was a document carrying my copied signature. David photographed both forms with his tablet. Then he said I cannot make a final determination about the signature during an inspection. That will have to be reviewed through the appropriate process. Michael seized on that immediately. Exactly. David looked at him. I am not saying this document is valid. Michael went quiet. David continued. What I can determine today is whether the current use of the property complies with zoning permitting and safety requirements. He looked toward the open garage. I'll need access. Michael stepped forward. I can show you everything. David looked at me. Mrs. Simmons, do I have your permission to enter and inspect the accessory structure? The question was so simple that I almost cried. My permission? He asked me. Not Michael. Not the company. Me. Yes, I said. You have my permission. David nodded. Thank you. We walked toward the garage. Michael moved ahead of us. I just want to clarify that most of what's in here is portable equipment. We're not running a full manufacturing operation. David said nothing. He entered slowly. His eyes moved from the commercial shelving to the lumber racks, then to the power tools, then to the electrical panel. He took photographs. Michael began explaining each item. That table saw isn't permanently mounted. This compressor is temporary. The cabinet frames are going to a client. We don't keep large quantities of finishing products here. David finally said, Mr. Simmons, I need you to let me inspect without commentary for a few minutes. Michael stopped talking. I stood just inside the doorway. For months I had looked at that garage and wondered whether I was being unreasonable. Now I watched a city inspector study the same things I had questioned. He checked electrical outlets, photographed conduit, measured clearance near equipment, examined storage shelves. Then he walked toward the back corner. He stopped. What's stored in those containers? Michael answered immediately. Finishing supplies. What kind stains? Sealers, adhesives, some solvents. David looked at him. How much? Not much. He opened one cabinet. His expression changed. Michael saw it too. It looks worse than it is. David did not respond. He took another photograph. Then another. I felt my stomach twist. This was the moment the story changed again. Until then I had believed the worst thing Michael had done was use my property without permission and submit paperwork with a copied signature. But as David continued moving through the garage, I began to understand something more frightening. Michael had not merely turned my garage into a business. He had made changes that could leave me responsible for problems I had never agreed to create. And judging by the inspector's face, he was finding more than one. David Mercer stood in the back corner of my garage, with one hand resting on the door of a metal storage cabinet. Inside were cans of stain sealers, adhesives, and solvents. More than I had ever realized were there. Michael moved closer. They're all commercial products. We use them on jobs. David glanced at the labels. How long have these been stored here? Michael hesitated. A while. How long? Couple months. David looked at me. Mrs. Simmons, were you aware these materials were being stored here, Num? Michael turned sharply. Mom, you've seen the shelves. I've seen containers. I did not know what was inside them. They're normal finishing products. David remained calm. Some are normal products, Mr. Simmons. That does not mean they can be stored in any quantity in any location under any conditions. Michael's jaw tightened. David photographed the cabinet, then stepped back. Do you have the safety data sheets for these materials? Michael nodded too quickly. Yes. Where at the shop? I stared at him. David did too. Michael caught himself. I mean here. Somewhere. He began opening drawers. Probably in the office file. What office, I asked. He ignored me. Then I saw it. On the far side of the garage, behind a stack of cabinet doors, stood a small folding desk with a laptop, dock, printer receipts, and hanging file folders. I had noticed the table before. I had never realized Michael considered it an office. David walked toward it. Is this business administration conducted here sometimes? Payroll number invoicing occasionally. Customer records some. Employee scheduling. Michael sighed. This is getting ridiculous. David looked at him. I'm asking questions relevant to the use of the property. Michael folded his arms. Fine. Yes. Sometimes we do paperwork here. David entered something into his tablet. I felt as though someone were slowly translating my garage into a language I had never wanted to learn. Commercial storage, employee workspace, fabrication, business administration, hazardous materials, electrical alterations. Each phrase made Michael's temporary storage sound more dishonest. David moved next to the electrical panel. He removed a flashlight from his pocket and examined the new conduit. Who performed this work? Michael said, a licensed electrician. Name, Patrick Doyle. Company, Doyle Electrical Services. David typed the information. Was a permit pulled? Michael paused. Yes. David looked at the panel. Permit number, I don't have it memorized. Understandable, I can verify it. For a moment, Michael seemed relieved. Then David examined a second conduit line running behind shelving. What does this feed? Michael stepped over. That powers the rear outlets. David looked toward the back wall. There are 4 new receptacles. Yes. Installed at the same time. Michael hesitated again. Pretty much. Pretty much. There were 2 phases. David looked at him. Was the second phase permitted silence? That silence was becoming its own language. David took more photographs. I stood beside Thomas's workbench with my arms folded tightly across my chest. I had been angry when I first discovered the electrical box. Now I was beginning to understand how little I had actually known. Not only had Michael altered the wiring, there may have been additional work hidden behind shelving after I explicitly told him not to make more changes. David moved toward one wall and pointed to a section where a vertical support had been partially cut around new shelving. Was this framing altered? Michael followed his gaze. That's not structural. I didn't ask if you believe it's structural. It's just a notch. David examined it. Who made the alteration? One of my guys. Was it reviewed? No. David entered another note. Michael's frustration finally broke through. Look, we're talking about a garage. Nobody built an apartment here. Nobody knocked the building down. You're making every little thing sound like a criminal operation. David looked up. No one said that. You're photographing screws and shelves like this is some major violation. I'm documenting conditions relevant to a code inspection. Michael laughed bitterly. And all because one neighbor didn't like hearing a saw. I spoke before David could. This did not happen because of one neighbor. Michael turned toward me. You don't know that. I know you used my garage for months after I told you it was temporary. You let me. I let you store equipment. You knew people were working here. After you started, you didn't stop us. The words hit me harder than he probably intended. I stared at him. You think because I didn't throw your employees into the street that meant I approved everything I'm saying you knew. I knew pieces. Michael shook his head. Convenient. That word cut deeper than I expected. Convenient, yes. Now that the city is here, suddenly you knew nothing. I felt heat rise into my face. David looked between us but said nothing. Michael continued. You saw the vans. You saw the tools. You saw the materials. You weren't blind. No, I said. I was trusting. He opened his mouth. I did not let him speak. And every time I objected, you told me it was temporary. Every time I asked a question, you gave me half an answer. Every time you crossed a line, you apologized after the fact and acted like that erased it. That is not fair. You copied my signature onto a city document. We don't know that. I stepped toward him. I know I did not sign it. Michael's face flushed. David raised one hand. I need both of you to stop for a moment. The garage went quiet. David turned toward me. Mrs. Simmons, I understand this is personal. I also need to make clear that today's inspection is about the property conditions and current use. I nodded. He turned to Michael. And Mr. Simmons, whether the owner observed some business activity is not the same question as whether she authorized specific construction permitting representations or ongoing commercial use. Michael looked away. David continued inspecting. He checked the side entrance, measured the width, photographed a stack of lumber that narrowed the path. Then he asked, how many employees routinely work here at one time? Michael said, usually 2. I said sometimes 4. Michael looked at me sharply. David asked, how often? Several mornings a week before I complained. Michael scoffed. We've reduced that. David entered another note. How many customer visits occur here? None, Michael said. I remembered a woman who had once come by carrying cabinet samples. One customer came in November. Michael turned. That was a consultation because her contractor canceled. David nodded. One confirmed customer visit. It was one time. I'm simply documenting it. Then David stepped outside and looked at the driveway. He photographed scrape marks near the curb and the area where delivery trucks often stopped. He looked toward the neighboring houses. How frequently do deliveries occur? Michael said. Not often, I said. At least several a month before I started refusing them. Michael glared at me. I no longer cared. For months I had softened every sentence because I was afraid the truth would make my son look bad. Now I understood that hiding the truth only made me responsible for protecting the behavior. David returned to the garage. He stood near the entrance for several seconds reviewing something on his tablet. Then he spoke. Based on what I've seen today, this property cannot continue operating in its current manner. Michael's head lifted. What does that mean? It means there are multiple compliance concerns that require correction. What concerns? David looked at his notes. Commercial business activity occurring from a residential accessory structure. Employee activity inconsistent with ordinary home use. Unpermitted or insufficiently documented electrical modifications. Storage conditions for finishing products that need review. Structural alterations that may require correction or inspection. And questions regarding the owner authorization associated with the property. Michael stared at him. You're shutting me down. I'm issuing a stop on commercial operations from this location until the relevant violations and approvals are resolved. Michael took a step forward. You can't do that today. David's expression did not change. I can require activity contributing to code violations to cease. I have contracts. That is not part of my determination. I have employees. I understand. I have materials here for active jobs. You may arrange removal consistent with the notice. Michael looked at me. His face had changed completely. The fear from earlier was gone. Now there was fury. You did this. I stared at him. No. You called them. They contacted me. You gave them every possible thing they could use against me. I answered questions. You could have told them this was temporary. It was supposed to be temporary. You could have said you allowed it. I did not allow this. He gestured around the garage. This is my livelihood. I felt something inside me harden. And this is my home. Michael laughed in disbelief. A garage matters more than my company. That is not what I said. It's what you're doing. David stepped between us slightly. Mr. Simmons? Michael ignored him. He pointed toward the shelves. Do you have any idea how many hours I've put into this business? How many nights I've worked? How much money is sitting in here? Yes. No, you don't. His voice rose. I have people depending on me, and you're standing there acting satisfied because some inspector finally told you what you wanted to hear. That sentence hurt because part of me did feel relieved, but not satisfied. I did not want Michael ruined. I wanted him stopped. There was a difference. You think I wanted this, I asked. You certainly don't look upset. That was when something in me finally snapped. Not loudly, clearly. You brought strangers into my home. Michael went still. You changed my property without asking me. You moved your father's belongings. You used my address on contracts. You turned my garage into advertising. You submitted paperwork with my signature on it that I never signed. His face tightened. And somehow I continued, you think you are the one being humiliated. The words echoed off the garage walls. Michael stared at me. For once he had no immediate answer. I pointed toward the metal cabinet. I am standing in a building. I own learning from a city employee. What has been stored here? What has been wired here? What has been altered here? And what has been filed in my name? My voice shook now. Not from fear. From grief. You made me the last person to know what was happening on my own property. Michael looked away. David remained silent. I was grateful for that. Some moments do not need witnesses to speak, only witnesses to hear. After several seconds, David closed his tablet. Mrs. Simmons, I'll provide you with the written notice and next steps. Some corrective work may require licensed professionals and additional inspection. Will I be fined? I can't determine that today. The ownership and authorization circumstances will be part of the record. Cooperating promptly will matter. I nodded. Michael looked toward him. What about my business? You need to relocate commercial operations from this property unless and until lawful approvals are established. Michael gave a bitter laugh. So that's it, David answered calmly. That is the current order. He printed a notice from a small portable device in his vehicle. A few minutes later, he handed me a copy. My name appeared at the top. Elena Simmons, property owner. This time seeing those words did not frighten me. They grounded me. David gave me his card. If you have questions, contact me directly. I will. Then he left. The city vehicle pulled away. Silence settled over the driveway. Michael stood inside the garage with his hands on his hips. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he turned toward me. You realize what you've done? I looked at him. No, Michael. I held up the city notice. For the first time in months, I'm beginning to realize what you did. His face twisted with anger. Then something else. Fear. He looked around the garage as though seeing it differently now. Not as free space, not as his workshop, as a place he could lose. And I realized the inspector had done more than stop a business operation that morning. He had forced my son to confront a fact I had been trying to tell him for months. The garage was never his. The house was never his. And whatever he believed about the future, I was still very much alive in the present. Michael waited until David Mercer's city vehicle disappeared at the end of the street before he spoke again. For several seconds he stood in the open garage with his arms hanging stiffly at his sides. Then he turned toward me. You could have stopped that. I stared at him. No. Yes, you could have. How you could have told him we were working it out. We were not working it out. I agreed to leave. After months of ignoring every boundary I gave you. Michael shook his head. That's not what I mean. He walked deeper into the garage, then turned back. You could have told him you were okay with the business staying until I found somewhere else. But I'm not. He laughed bitterly. Right. The way he said it made my chest tighten. Don't do that. Do what act as if I betrayed you by telling the truth. You didn't have to tell him everything. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. You mean I should have lied? I mean you could have been reasonable. Reasonable. Yes. I looked around the garage, the shelving, the commercial equipment, the altered wiring, the finishing products, the boxes carrying customer names. Thomas's workbench trapped underneath the business Michael had built around it. Tell me something, I said. At what point in all of this was I supposed to become reasonable enough for you? He frowned. What does that even mean? When you changed the lock, Mom, When you moved your father's things, I put them back. When you rewired the garage, I explained that. When you listed my house as your business address, you knew why. When you used a copy of my signature, his face hardened. You keep saying that like you know exactly what happened. I know I didn't sign it. He looked away. That doesn't answer how it got there. Michael. He did not respond. I stepped toward him. Tell me now. He stared at the concrete floor. Tell me what? How did my signature get on that form? He rubbed the back of his neck. It was paperwork. No. I shook my head. That answer is over. What do you want me to say? The truth. Michael's jaw worked as though he were chewing on words he did not want to release. Finally, he said, the application needed owner authorization. I know. I couldn't submit it without that section completed. I know. And you had already agreed to let me use the garage. For storage. You knew the business was there, not when that form was submitted. He looked up sharply. I continued. The city told me the date. October 23rd. His face changed. You filed it before I even knew your employees would be working here. It was part of getting things organized. You mean making your plans permanent? They weren't permanent. Then why did you need government paperwork? He looked angry now, but beneath that anger I saw something else. Exhaustion. He sat on the edge of one of the work tables. I needed to show a real operating location. To whom he hesitated. Clients. That's not the whole answer. Suppliers. Michael. He closed his eyes. And a contractor. What contractor? A general contractor I was trying to get work from. I waited. He continued reluctantly. They were putting together a group of subcontractors for a development project. Kitchens built in some commercial cabinetry. The big contract, yes. The one he had used when asking me for more time. The contract that was supposed to stabilize everything. What did they require? Proof of capacity. What does that mean? A workspace. Equipment. Insurance. Business address. Staff. So you presented my garage as your company workshop. It was where I was working. That isn't what I asked. He stood again. What difference does it make? It makes every difference. I was trying to win work. You were trying to win work using something you did not own. His face tightened. I wasn't selling the building. No. You were selling the appearance that it was yours to use. That's not the same thing. It is when you signed my approval for me. Michael slammed one palm onto the work table. I didn't sign your name. The sound startled me. I stared at him. Then who did? He looked away. I waited. Michael. I uploaded the signature. The words were barely audible. What? He swallowed. I has the window authorization on my computer because you sent it to me. I felt cold despite already knowing the answer. You copied it. I inserted it. That is copying it. I wasn't pretending to sell your house. You were pretending I had given consent. You had given consent. No. My voice came out louder than I intended. You do not get to decide what I consented to. Michael's eyes flashed. I knew you would have signed it if I explained everything. The sentence stunned me into silence. Then I asked, if you believed that, why didn't you ask? He said nothing. Why? His shoulders dropped. Because I knew you'd say no. There it was. The truth. Simple. Ugly. Complete. I stared at my son. You knew I would say no. Yes. And you did it anyway. He rubbed both hands over his face. I was desperate. You had choices, not good ones. That does not make my signature one of them. He turned away. I know that now. No. You knew it then. He looked back at me. For once he did not argue. I could see the shame beginning to push through the anger. But shame did not erase what he had done. I sat on the old stool beside Thomas's workbench. Start at the beginning. What? Tell me everything. Michael shook his head. There's nothing else. I don't believe you. His face tightened. That's where we are now. That is where you brought us. For a long time he stood without speaking. Then he pulled a folding chair toward him and sat. The fight seemed to drain out of his body all at once. When the storage building sold, he said I was already in trouble. How much trouble? He stared at his hands. I'd lost 2 large jobs. Why didn't you tell me? Because you worry. That was your decision to make for me too. He ignored that. One client held back almost $40,000 over a dispute. I had payroll, vehicle payments, supplier balances. Then the warehouse owner told me I had to leave. How far behind were you on what everything? Michael looked embarrassed. Maybe 70,000. I inhaled slowly. $70,000, not all overdue at once. But you were carrying that much pressure. Yes, and instead of downsizing, if I downsized, I would lose the contracts that could get me out of it. And if you kept expanding, I thought I could grow through it. Thomas would have hated that sentence. He believed people could work through problems. He never believed they could borrow their way through reality forever. Michael leaned forward. The development contract was the chance. If I got it, I could keep everyone working for most of a year. So you needed a shop. I needed to look like I had one. The honesty of that answer hurt. You needed to look like you had one. Yes. And my garage was convenient. It was more than convenient. He looked around. It had space, power, access. I already knew the layout. Dad built half of what I know in this room. For a moment, grief softened both of us. Then I remembered the city form. You still should have asked. I know. No, Michael. Stop saying that like this is something you realized today. You knew. He looked down. Yes. Why did you believe you were entitled to make that choice? He opened his mouth, then closed it. I waited. His silence stretched so long that I almost repeated the question. Then he said, because I thought you'd get over it. The answer was painful but not surprising. And after that? What do you mean you weren't planning to leave in 2 weeks? He said nothing. You weren't planning to leave in 60 either, were you? His silence answered for him. I felt something in my chest drop. How long, Michael, I don't know. That isn't true. He rubbed his hands together. I thought once the business stabilized I'd figure something out. When I don't know. A year. Maybe. 2. He said nothing. I stood. My God. Mom. No. I want to understand. I turned toward him. You changed my garage, used my address, filed my signature, made your company dependent on this property, and you didn't even have a plan to leave. I was going to. When, eventually. The word landed differently now. Eventually. The same word Jenna had used. I looked at him. Eventually. He froze. I knew then he understood. I heard you and Jenna that night. His face went pale. What night? The night she left her scarf here. Michael stared at me. I heard her say the garage would be yours eventually anyway. He looked away. I heard your answer too. He swallowed. Mom. You said I know. That wasn't. What did it mean? It was just a conversation. No. Tell me what it meant. He stood again, but this time he seemed smaller. I don't know. You do. His face tightened. Fine. He took a breath. I assumed I'd inherit the house someday. There was no cruelty in his voice. That somehow made it worse. He said it like a fact. Like rain eventually fell. Like children eventually grew up. Like mothers eventually died. I see. That's not how I meant it. How did you mean it? You're my mother. I'm your son. Dad's gone. I thought you thought what? That it would come to me. I stared at him. And because it might come to you someday, you decided you could start using it now. No. Yes. I didn't think of it like that. That is exactly how you thought of it. He shook his head. You're twisting this. Am I? I stepped closer. You said you could not afford a workshop, so you used mine. You knew I would not authorize the business, so you used my signature. You did not make a real move-out plan because you expected the property to become yours eventually. Michael's eyes filled, though no tears fell. I was trying to save my company, and you decided my future was available to finance it. That's not fair. Neither was planning around my death. He flinched. I never wanted you dead. I didn't say you did. My voice cracked. But you began treating what would happen after I died as if it had already happened. He stared at me. I felt tears in my own eyes now. I am still alive, Michael. His face broke. Not dramatically, just enough. His shoulders dropped. He looked toward the floor. I know. No. I shook my head. I don't think you did. The silence that followed was different from every silence we had shared before. No defensiveness, no strategy, no excuses, just the weight of what had finally been said aloud. After a while, Michael whispered, I messed up. I wiped beneath one eye. Yes, I don't know how to fix this. For once, I don't either. He looked toward Thomas's workbench. I kept thinking Dad would understand. I followed his gaze. Your father would understand being scared. Michael nodded. He would understand being in debt. Another nod. He would understand wanting to save a business. I paused. But he would never understand using someone else's name because they would not give you the answer you wanted. Michael closed his eyes. I let the words sit. Then I picked up the city notice. You have to move the business. He did not argue. And the garage has to be repaired. He nodded. And we are going to deal with the document honestly. His eyes opened. Fear returned. What does that mean? I don't know yet. Mom, please. I am not promising to protect you from every consequence. His face tightened. I could lose everything. You might lose some things. That's easy for you to say. No. I looked around the garage. It is not easy at all. Because that was what he still did not fully understand. His consequences were going to hurt me too. I was not standing outside his life watching him fail. I was his mother. Every mistake he made still reached into me. But for the first time, I understood that loving him did not require me to stand between him and every result of his choices. Michael picked up his keys. At the door, he stopped. Are you going to cut me out of the house? The question stunned me. What your will? I stared at him. Even now, after everything we had just said, inheritance was where his fear went first. And perhaps he saw the realization on my face. His expression changed immediately. That came out wrong. Yes, I said quietly. It did. He left without another word. I stood alone in the garage. Then I looked at Thomas's measuring tape hanging from the nail. My husband had been gone 3 years, but suddenly I remembered something he had told me long before any of this happened. It had been after another argument with Michael about money. Thomas had said, there's a difference between leaving something to a child and letting that child live as if you've already left. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now I wondered if Thomas had understood our son far better than I had. And for the first time, I found myself wondering exactly what protections my husband had put in place before he died. The next morning, I called Rebecca Hayes before I had even finished my first cup of coffee. She answered on the second ring. Elena, I need to ask you something about Thomas's estate. There was a brief pause. All right. Did he ever put anything in place regarding the house? What do you mean? I mean anything that would prevent Michael from assuming he had some right to it while I was still alive. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think you should come into the office. That answer made my stomach tighten. Is there something I don't know? There may be something you've forgotten. I looked toward the garage through the kitchen window. Can I come this morning? I have an opening at 11. I'll be there. After we hung up, I sat at the table and tried to remember every conversation Thomas and I had ever had about inheritance. There had been so many ordinary discussions over the years. Beneficiaries, life insurance, the house, retirement accounts. Who would receive what if one of us died first? Most of those conversations had happened while we were healthy, which meant neither of us really believed they mattered yet. Thomas had always been more careful about those things than I was. I used to tease him for reading every paragraph twice. He kept copies of deeds, updated beneficiary forms, asked questions I thought were unnecessary. When he wanted us to meet with Rebecca years earlier, I had rolled my eyes. We're not millionaires, I told him. Thomas smiled. You don't have to be rich to make a mess after you die. That sounded exactly like him. Practical, unromantic, correct. By 10:30, I was sitting in Rebecca's waiting room with my purse on my lap. Her assistant brought me into the conference room. A few minutes later, Rebecca entered carrying a thick file. She placed it on the table. I pulled the original estate planning documents Thomas and you signed 6 years ago. I looked at the folder. I remember the wills. Yes. And the medical directives. Yes. She sat across from me. But there were also property provisions. I frowned. What kind? Rebecca opened the folder. Let me start with what is not here. I nodded. There is no secret transfer of the house to Michael. I didn't think there was. There is no automatic ownership interest for either of your children during your lifetime. Good. And there is no provision allowing Michael to use the property based on an expectation of inheritance. A humorless laugh escaped me. That would have been useful to explain to him 8 months ago. Rebecca gave me a small, sympathetic smile. Then she slid a document toward me. This is the deed structure Thomas and you finalized after refinancing the house. I read the first page. My name appeared beside Thomas's. What am I looking for? Keep going. I turned the page. Rebecca pointed to a paragraph. After Thomas's death, the property remained entirely under your control. No remainder interest was transferred to the children. I looked up. Meaning Michael has no present ownership right. None. I felt something release inside me, though I already knew the house was mine. Perhaps hearing an attorney say it mattered because Michael had spent so long behaving as though the future was already settled. Rebecca continued. You can sell the house. I nodded. You can refinance it. Another nod. You can rent it. Yes. You can change your estate plan. I stopped. Without Michael's permission, she almost smiled. Certainly without Michael's permission. I sat back. There was something almost absurd about the fact that I needed to hear that aloud. Of course, I did not need my son's permission to decide what happened to my property. But after months of being treated like an obstacle standing between him and something he expected, I had started thinking about my own house in terms of his future. Rebecca turned another page. There's something else. She removed a smaller envelope from the file. My name was written across the front in Thomas's handwriting. Elena. My breath caught. What? Rebecca looked at me. Thomas asked me to keep this with the estate file. When you completed the documents, why didn't I see it after he died? You did. I stared at her. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. I gave it to you during one of our meetings. I frowned. Then slowly I remembered. There had been so much paperwork after Thomas died. Death certificates, bank forms, insurance, funeral bills, property records. Rebecca had handed me an envelope and told me Thomas had written it years earlier. I had taken it home. I had read part of it. Then grief had swallowed almost everything. I gave it back. You asked me to keep it with the file. I looked at the handwriting again. My chest tightened. Can I open it? It belongs to you. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the flap. Inside was one sheet of yellow legal paper. Thomas's handwriting covered both sides. Not a formal letter, just notes. That was very Thomas. He began Elena. If you're reading this because I went first, I'm sorry I won the argument about who would outlive whom. I laughed, then immediately cried. Rebecca quietly pushed a box of tissues toward me. I wiped my eyes and continued. Thomas wrote about the house, about how hard we had worked to keep it, about the years when our mortgage payment seemed enormous, about replacing the roof ourselves because we could not afford a contractor, about painting the nursery twice because I changed my mind about the color. Then the letter shifted. There was one paragraph underlined. I read it twice. Elena, help the kids when you want to, but don't let guilt decide what belongs to you. We raise them to build lives of their own. If they ever make you feel selfish for keeping control of yours, remember that love does not require surrender. I covered my mouth. For several seconds I could not continue. Rebecca looked away, giving me privacy. I could hear Thomas saying those words. Not dramatically, not angrily, probably sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee beside him. I turned the page. Near the bottom, he had written, Michael especially has always had a way of seeing opportunity before he sees boundaries. That can make him successful if he learns responsibility. It can make him dangerous to himself if people keep rescuing him. I closed my eyes. There was no accusation in the sentence, no condemnation. Thomas had loved Michael fiercely, but he had seen him clearly, maybe more clearly than I had allowed myself to. Rebecca waited until I lowered the paper. I had forgotten this. You were grieving. I thought Thomas was too hard on Michael sometimes. I remember. He made him sign repayment agreements. Yes, he charged him for damage when he borrowed the truck. Rebecca nodded. I made him pay back the $5,000 we loaned him for his first equipment trailer. You wanted to forgive that loan. I gave a weak smile. I did. And Thomas refused. Yes. I remembered the argument. Michael had been 27 and struggling. I told Thomas that parents were supposed to help. He told me repayment was part of the help. At the time, I thought he was being stubborn. Now I understood. Thomas had not been trying to keep money from Michael. He had been trying to teach him that receiving help did not erase responsibility. I looked down at the letter again. Do you think he expected something like this? Rebecca considered the question. I don't think Thomas predicted a forged authorization form and a city inspection. Despite everything, I smiled. That would have been impressive. But I do think he understood a pattern. What pattern? Michael's tendency to push forward first and deal with permission later. I sighed. That sounds right. Rebecca folded her hands. Thomas also worried that you would compensate for his strictness by becoming too accommodating. I looked at her. He said that. Not in those words. What words? She hesitated. Then she smiled slightly. He said, if I die first, Elena will give away the furniture while she's still sitting on it. I laughed through my tears. That sounds like him. Rebecca nodded. He loved your generosity. I know. He just didn't want anyone to use it against you. I looked out the conference room window. For 3 years after Thomas died, I had thought protecting his memory meant preserving things. The workbench, the fishing rods, his old hat, his tools. But sitting in Rebecca's office, I realized I had missed the more important inheritance. His judgment, his boundaries, his belief that love and responsibility belonged together. What do I do now? I asked. Rebecca leaned back. That depends on what you want your relationship with Michael to look like after this. I don't want revenge. Good. I don't want to destroy his business. Also good. But I want my garage back. Then that needs to happen. I want the property repaired properly. Yes. And I never want him using my address or signature again. Rebecca nodded. Those are clear goals. I also don't want to keep bailing him out. That may be the hardest part. I knew she was right. Michael would need commercial space, deposits, moving costs, electrical setup, insurance. He would probably ask me for help. He might even make a convincing case. And every instinct I had as his mother would scream at me to solve the problem. I looked at Thomas's letter. If I give him money to move, I said slowly, am I helping him or rescuing him? Rebecca did not answer immediately. That depends on whether the money protects him from a consequence he needs to experience. I sat with that. It was an uncomfortable distinction, but an important one. What about the city form? We respond truthfully. Could he face criminal charges? There are several possibilities, but I'm not going to speculate. The city may refer the authorization issue for further review. The important thing is that you do not make false statements to protect him. I nodded. That frightened me. But not as much as it would have a week earlier. What if he blames me? He probably will, at least initially. I looked down. Rebecca leaned forward. Elena, accountability often feels like betrayal to someone who has benefited from weak boundaries. I absorbed that quietly. Then I slipped Thomas's letter back into the envelope. Can I take this home? Of course. When I returned to the house, the garage was closed. No vans, no employees. The city's stop order had turned the property strangely quiet. I went inside the garage alone. For the first time since the inspection, I did not see it as evidence. I saw memories. Thomas standing at the bench, Michael beside him at 15, sanding a cabinet door. The two of them arguing over measurements, laughing, learning. There had been love in that room long before there was conflict. That mattered too. I rested my hand on the workbench. I finally understand, I whispered. I was not sure whether I meant Thomas's letter, his rules, or the last 3 years of my life. Maybe all of it. That evening Michael called. His voice was cautious. Can we talk? Yes. I found a place. I sat straighter. A commercial space, small industrial unit near Midlothian. That's good. It's expensive. There it was. I waited. There's a deposit, he continued. And some electrical work. I'm trying to figure out financing. Still I waited. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. Could you help me? My eyes moved toward Thomas's envelope on the table. A week earlier, I might have answered before thinking. I might have asked how much. I might have told myself family helped family. Instead, I said no. The silence on the other end was enormous. What? I'm not financing the move. Mom, I'm moving because you wanted me out. You are moving because your business was operating somewhere it did not have permission to operate. That's the same thing. No, it isn't. He sounded stunned. You're really not going to help? I already helped. For a garage, for 8 months. Michael exhaled sharply. I don't know if I can do this without money. I looked at Thomas's handwriting. Then I said something I wished I had learned years earlier. You may have to do it smaller. Michael was quiet. That's Dad talking. No, I said. This time it's me. 3 days after I told Michael I would not finance his move, Rebecca arranged a meeting at her office. Michael did not want to come. I knew that because he called me the night before. Why does a lawyer need to be involved in me moving equipment out of a garage? His tone was controlled, but I could hear the resentment underneath it. Because this is no longer just about moving equipment. It should be. It stopped being that when my signature appeared on a document I never signed. He went quiet. I continued. And there are repairs that need to be made. I already said I'd fix things. You also said the garage would only be storage. That's not fair. It's accurate. There was a long pause. Then he asked, Is Rebecca going to threaten me? No. Then what is this, a written agreement? Michael laughed without humor. Dad really did win in the end. What does that mean? Everything has to be written down now. I almost answered defensively. Instead, I thought about Thomas's letter. Responsibility. Boundaries. No assumptions. Yes, I said. This time it does. Michael arrived at Rebecca's office 10 minutes late. He was wearing work pants and a dark jacket with the Mason Ridge Interiors logo over the chest. He looked exhausted. Not defeated, but close. Rebecca had arranged 3 chairs around a round table instead of sitting behind her desk. I appreciated that. This was not a courtroom. It was a family problem with legal consequences. There was a difference. Michael sat across from me. Rebecca opened a folder. I want to be clear before we begin. I represent Elena. Michael nodded. I figured. This meeting is not about punishing you. It is about establishing what happens next with the property and documenting everyone's responsibilities. He leaned back. Fine. Rebecca slid a 2-page agreement toward him. Michael glanced down. What is this? A temporary access and removal agreement. He read the title again. I need a contract to take my own equipment to access Elena's property for the purpose of removing it. His jaw tightened at the phrase Elena's property. I noticed. So did Rebecca. She continued calmly. The city has ordered commercial operations to stop. That does not mean you are prohibited from removing materials and equipment in an orderly manner. Michael scanned the first page. How long? 21 days for removal of business inventory and equipment, subject to reasonable scheduling with Elena. His head lifted. 21. The city wants the commercial activity ended immediately. This gives you time to remove what is already there without treating the garage as an active business site. I told Mom the new place isn't ready. Rebecca nodded. You can transport equipment to temporary storage if necessary. That costs money. Yes. Michael looked at me. I did not answer. That silence was harder than saying no. because every part of me still wanted to fix the problem. I wanted to tell him I could cover 1 month of storage. I wanted to say I would pay the deposit and he could repay me later. I wanted to make that tight, worried expression disappear from my son's face. Then I remembered what Rebecca had asked me. Would the money help him move forward, or protect him from a consequence he needed to experience? I kept my hands folded in my lap. Michael returned to the agreement. What else? Rebecca pointed to the second section. No employees may perform fabrication assembly, finishing customer consultation, or business administration on the property. What if I need help lifting equipment? Removal assistance is permitted. So my guys can come. To remove items, yes. Not to continue business operations. He nodded reluctantly. What about the repairs? Rebecca turned the page. That is the next section. Michael's expression hardened again. The agreement required him to pay for licensed professionals to inspect and correct work he had authorized without my approval. Electrical modifications. Any structural alterations. Damage caused by equipment installation. Removal of business fixtures. Restoration of reasonable access to the garage. Michael read silently. Then he looked up. This could cost thousands. Rebecca said, possibly. He turned toward me. You expect me to pay for all of it? Yes. Even improvements. I almost smiled. There was that word again. Michael. If someone replaces the kitchen cabinets in your house without asking, do you owe them money because they call it an improvement? That's different. Why? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Rebecca stepped in. The issue is authorization. Work performed without the owner's approval does not become the owner's financial responsibility simply because the person performing it believes it improved the property. Michael shook his head. Some of that electrical work made the garage safer. Then a licensed electrician can determine what should remain and what needs correction. He looked back at the document. What about the city paperwork? My stomach tightened slightly. Rebecca's voice stayed neutral. Elena will provide truthful information if the city requests it. Michael looked at me. What does that mean? It means exactly what she said. Are you filing something against me? No, I said. Then what are you doing? I'm not lying for you. His expression changed. I never asked you to lie. Not directly. That's not fair. You told me I could have explained things differently to the inspector. He looked down. I continued. You wanted me to make the situation sound more authorized than it was. I was scared. I know. I still am. I know that too. Michael rubbed his forehead. This could follow me. I felt pain in my chest. Because he was right. The copied signature could create consequences far beyond moving equipment. But I could not erase that risk without pretending the act had never happened. And it had. Rebecca let the silence settle before continuing. There's one additional requirement. Michael looked suspicious. What Mason Ridge Interiors must stop using Elena's address for business purposes. I'm already changing it. All listings, supplier accounts, websites, invoices, marketing materials, and active records where reasonably possible. I can't erase old contracts. You don't have to erase history. You need to stop representing the property as a current business location. Michael nodded slowly. That's fair. The words surprised me. Maybe they surprised him too. Rebecca looked at him. And you will not use Elena's name, signature, property records, or personal information in connection with the business without her specific written authorization. Michael's face reddened. I understand. Rebecca pushed the agreement slightly closer. You do not need to sign this today if you want independent legal advice. Michael stared at the paper, then at me. You really need all this? Yes. His eyes narrowed. You don't trust me at all. The question hurt because it was partly true. I took a breath. I trust that you love me. He blinked. I trust that you did not wake up one morning planning to hurt me. His expression softened slightly. But I do not trust you to decide where my boundaries are. The softness disappeared. I continued anyway. You proved that when you decided my consent was close enough to your assumption. Michael looked toward the window. That's a nice lawyer phrase. It's mine. He gave a tired laugh. Then he looked back down at the agreement. What happens if I don't sign? Rebecca answered. Elena can revoke access except as otherwise legally required for property retrieval, and future coordination would become more formal. Michael looked at me. So you'd lock me out, if necessary. You would really do that? Yes. The answer came out more easily than I expected. He stared at me for several seconds. Then he picked up the pen. I'll sign. Rebecca stopped him. Read it first. Michael almost smiled. Dad would like you. He did. That shut him up. He read every page, slowly. For once I was glad. Then he signed. Rebecca made copies. When the meeting ended, Michael and I walked toward the parking lot together. For a few steps, neither of us spoke. Then he said, Jenna thinks you're going too far. I stopped beside my car. I assumed she might. She says you're choosing a building over your family. There it was. The sentence I had been expecting. I looked at him. Do you believe that Michael shoved his hands into his pockets? I don't know. Yes, you do. He looked away. She thinks if you really cared about the business surviving, you'd help with the deposit. And what do you think I think you could? That wasn't my question. Michael sighed. I think you have the money. So because I can, I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He leaned against his truck. Mom, the new unit is $2,800 a month. They want first month, last month, and a security deposit. That's a lot. Exactly. And you signed the lease not yet. Then perhaps you need something smaller. His face tightened. You keep saying that. Because you keep solving money problems by making the business bigger. I can't run the company from a closet. No. But maybe you cannot currently afford the company you're trying to run. That hurt him. I saw it instantly. Wow, I'm not trying to insult you. Sounds like it. I'm saying what your father would have said. No. You said last time it was you talking. He was right, so I corrected myself. What I am saying is this. If the business only survives because you use my property for free, my address without permission, and my signature when I say no, then the business is not actually surviving. Michael stared at me. I continued. It is being subsidized by things you do not own. His expression hardened. That's easy to say when your mortgage is paid off. I felt the old guilt rise. Then I thought about how that mortgage had been paid off. Thomas working overtime. Me taking extra summer hours at school. Years of driving used cars. Vacations postponed. Bills paid slowly. There had been no magical moment when our house became financially safe. We built that safety. You are right, I said. Michael looked surprised. My mortgage is paid off. He waited. But it was not paid off at 39, that silenced him. Your father and I struggled too. We just did it before you were old enough to remember most of it. Michael looked toward the parking lot. We never had employees depending on us. No. We had children. He glanced at me. And we still had to live within what we could afford. For several moments neither of us said anything. Then Michael asked quietly. So that's it. No help, no money. His shoulders dropped. But I will help in ways that don't make me responsible for your business. What does that mean? I'll cooperate with removal schedules. I'll give you copies of anything you need to show what equipment is yours. If the city needs access, I'll make time. He gave a small bitter smile. Very generous. I felt the insult. But I did not chase it. You asked whether I was choosing property over family. Michael looked at me. I'm not. I stepped closer. I'm choosing to stop confusing love with surrender. His expression shifted. I love you. I love Sophie. I care what happens to your family. I pointed toward Rebecca's office behind us. But family cannot mean that my no only counts when it is convenient for you. Michael stared at the ground. I continued more softly. If I keep rescuing you from every consequence someday, you may hate me for never forcing you to learn how to stand without me. He did not respond. Perhaps he was not ready to hear that. Maybe I had not been ready to say it until now. The following week the garage began emptying. Caleb and Marcus came with a rented box truck. They were polite, quiet. Nobody turned on a saw. Nobody assembled anything. They simply carried out equipment. For the first time, everyone treated the garage like property they were visiting, rather than a workplace they controlled. Michael barely spoke to me. On the fourth day, Jenna came by. She found me sweeping sawdust near the side door. "You're really making him pay for all the repairs?" "Yes." She folded her arms. "He doesn't have that kind of money right now. Then he may need a payment arrangement with the contractors. You know what this could do to us?" I rested the broom against the wall. "I know what it has already done to me." Jenna shook her head. "I just don't understand how a mother can watch her son struggle when she could fix it. The accusation would once have crushed me. Now I understood the trap inside it. I spent months fixing it. No, you let him use a garage. Yes, which you weren't using." I looked at her. There it was again. The sentence that had started to justify everything. "You still don't understand. What it was never about, whether I was using it." Jenna frowned. "It was mine." She looked irritated. "So ownership matters more than helping family?" "No." I picked up the broom again. "Consent matters." She stared at me. I continued. "And if helping family requires someone to ignore my no, then it is no longer help, it is entitlement." Jenna said nothing. She left a minute later. I watched her walk toward her car. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. But underneath the exhaustion was something steadier. For months I had been afraid boundaries would destroy my family. Now I was beginning to wonder whether the lack of boundaries had been destroying it all along. By the end of the week, half the commercial shelving was gone. The garage looked larger. Light reached places that had been hidden for months. And beneath the disappearing business pieces of my old life began to reappear. A folding chair, a box of Christmas lights, Thomas's fishing rods, his scarred wooden workbench. Michael still had a long way to go. So did I. But for the first time we were no longer arguing about whether the boundary existed. It was written down. He had signed it. And this time the signature was actually his. By the second week of the removal agreement, the garage had begun to breathe again. That was the only way I knew how to describe it. For months, every inch of the space had been claimed by something that did not belong there. Shelving crowded the walls, lumber blocked the windows, cabinet doors leaned against Thomas's old workbench, extension cords crossed the floor, boxes of hardware filled the corners. Now, little by little, the concrete was visible again. The first thing Michael removed was the large metal hardware cabinet he had once insisted would make everything cleaner. I stood near the side door while Caleb and Marcus rolled it toward the truck. When the cabinet moved, it revealed a faded patch on the wall where Thomas had once hung an old calendar. The calendar was gone, of course, but 4 thumbtack holes remained. I touched them with my fingertips after the men left. It was strange what grief chose to preserve. Not the important things. Not always. Sometimes it was 4 tiny holes in drywall. Sometimes it was a coffee stain on a workbench. Sometimes it was the shape of a man's handwriting on an envelope. Michael did not come inside the house during those first few days. He arrived, supervised the removal, and left. Our conversations were brief. "What time are the electricians coming? 9 tomorrow. Can Marcus pick up the compressor Friday?" "Yes, after 10. Did the city send anything else? Nothing personal, nothing warm, but nothing hostile either." I decided that was enough for the moment. Rebecca had told me that trust could not be repaired on command. "You don't need a dramatic reconciliation," she said. "You need consistent behavior." So I watched behavior. Michael found temporary storage for some of the equipment. He sold other pieces. I learned that from Caleb, not Michael. One afternoon, Caleb was loading a commercial edge sander into the back of a trailer when I asked, "Is that going to the new shop?" He hesitated. "No, ma'am. We're buyer in Mechanicsville." I looked at the machine. Michael had talked about that sander for months before he bought it. He said it would allow him to take on more custom jobs. "He sold it." Caleb nodded. "And the wide belt sander too." I felt an unexpected ache. Not because I cared about the equipment, because I understood what selling it meant. Michael was shrinking the business, doing exactly what I had told him he might have to do. And for the first time, he was doing it without asking me to soften the landing. The new space he eventually rented was not the large industrial unit he had first wanted near Midlothian. That one had been too expensive. Instead, he found a smaller unit south of the city in an older commercial complex. It had one overhead door, a small office, and just enough floor space for the equipment he truly needed. When he told me about it, we were standing in the garage beside a stack of empty shelves. "It's not impressive," he said. "Does it need to be?" He gave me a look. "You know what I mean. I think impressive has caused enough trouble." For the first time in weeks, the corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "The landlord is giving me 1 month reduced rent if I handle some painting." "That sounds useful. It needs better lighting. You know, an electrician." He looked at me. We both remembered the garage. Then unexpectedly he laughed. A short, embarrassed laugh. "Yeah," he said. "One I'll actually ask the landlord about first." I laughed too. It was small, but it mattered. A few days later, the electrician came to inspect my garage. His name was Patrick Doyle, the same man Michael said had done the original work. I expected an awkward encounter. Instead, Patrick seemed horrified when he learned I had not approved all the changes. "I thought your son had authorization," he said. We stood beside the panel while he examined the conduit. "He told you that he said the property owner had signed off on the business use." My stomach tightened. There it was again. The false document had not only gone to the city. Michael had used the idea of my consent to reassure other people too. Patrick continued. "The first circuit was permitted properly. The later outlets were added when he expanded the setup. That second portion should have been documented differently. Can it be corrected?" "Yes." He looked around. "Honestly, once the commercial equipment is gone, I'd remove some of this and restore the garage to normal residential use. Keep a couple upgraded outlets if you want them. If it's safe, it can be. Then that's what I want." Michael paid the bill. I knew because Patrick handed me the final invoice marked paid. That detail mattered, not because of the amount. Because Michael did not ask me to split it. He did not remind me that the outlets improved the garage. He did not call it unfair. He simply paid for correcting what he had authorized. The structural alteration was next. A licensed contractor examined the notched framing David had questioned. Fortunately, the damage was less serious than I feared. A support needed reinforcement, and a section of shelving had to be removed permanently. Again, Michael covered the cost. His business account was strained. I knew that too. But I did not offer money. Each time the urge came, I opened Thomas's letter. "Help the kids when you want to, but don't let guilt decide what belongs to you." I was beginning to understand that the sentence applied to more than property. My money belonged to me. My time belonged to me. My peace belonged to me. And my decisions did not become cruel simply because Michael disliked the consequences. By the end of the third week, almost everything connected to Mason Ridge Interiors was gone. The final removal happened on a rainy Tuesday morning. Michael arrived alone. No employees, no van, just his pickup truck. He came to remove the last 2 boxes of hardware and a stack of sample doors. I was in the kitchen when he knocked on the back door. Knocked. That stopped me. Michael had walked through that door without knocking for years. I opened it. "Morning, morning. I've got the last stuff." "All right." He hesitated. "Okay if I go back?" The question was so ordinary that he probably did not realize what it did to me. He was asking permission. Yes. I followed him outside. The garage smelled different now. Less like sawdust and finishing products, more like cold concrete and old wood. Michael loaded the boxes into his truck. Then he returned for the cabinet samples. After he carried those out, the commercial side of the garage was empty. Completely empty. I stood in the middle of the floor. For the first time in almost 8 months, I could walk from one side to the other without turning sideways. Michael stood beside the open door. "Looks bigger." "It does." He nodded toward the back wall. "You could park a car in here again." "I might." "You won't." I looked at him. He smiled faintly. "You hate parking inside." I smiled back. That's true. The small moment almost felt normal. Then I noticed the blue tarp folded beside the workbench. Underneath it were the last of Thomas's boxes. Michael saw me looking. I moved those back where they used to be. Thank you. He nodded. I walked toward the workbench. For months I had only been able to reach part of it. Now the entire surface was visible. The scratches, the burn mark from a soldering iron, the dark circle where Thomas had set his coffee cup every morning. I pulled open the top drawer. Inside were pencils, carpenter's chalk, a small level, 2 worn screwdrivers, and his measuring tape. I picked it up. The yellow casing was scratched and faded. I pressed the button. The metal tape snapped back into place with the familiar sharp sound I had heard thousands of times. My throat tightened. Michael stood behind me. I thought that was lost. So did I. He came closer. Dad had that thing forever. Since before you were born. Michael smiled. He never let me use it. He said you lost tools. I did lose tools. We both laughed softly. Then the laughter faded. Michael rested one hand on the workbench. I'm sorry. I looked at him. He had apologized before, many times. But this sounded different. There was no argument attached to it. No explanation. No request. I'm sorry I turned this place into something you never agreed to. I said nothing. He continued. I kept telling myself I was doing what I had to do. His fingers moved over one of the old scratches in the wood. And then every time you objected, I treated you like you were making my life harder. I swallowed. You did. I know. He looked toward the empty garage. I thought if the business worked eventually, none of the way I got there would matter. That's a dangerous way to think. Yeah. He took a breath. I know that now. I studied his face. Knowing it now doesn't make what happened disappear. I know. And I'm not ready to pretend everything is fine. I'm not asking you to. That mattered. More than he probably knew. For months, Michael had tried to hurry me past every discomfort. Every apology had come with an invisible demand. Now stop being upset. This time he was allowing the damage to remain real. We stood quietly for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket. I have something. He held out a key. I recognized it immediately. The replacement garage key from the lock he had changed without asking. I still had this. I looked at it resting in his palm. You can keep a house key. He shook his head. Not this one. Why? Because I don't need unlimited access to the garage. The answer surprised me. He placed the key in my hand. If I need to come in, I can ask. I closed my fingers around it. Such a small thing. A piece of metal that weighed almost nothing. Yet months earlier, Michael handing me a new key to my own property had made me feel displaced. Now returning his key felt like something being restored. Not ownership. That had always been mine. Respect. Maybe the beginning of it. Before he left, Michael paused at the garage entrance. I've got the city follow-up next week. I know. I'm going to tell them the truth about the form. I looked at him carefully. You are... Yes. Rebecca told you to get your own lawyer. I did. That surprised me. What did they say? That I made a serious mistake. His expression was tired. They used more expensive words. I almost smiled. I'm glad you got advice. I don't know what happens next, neither do I. He nodded. Then he walked toward his truck. I stood in the garage watching him go. There was still uncertainty ahead. The city still had to close the compliance case. Michael still had debts. Our relationship still carried bruises neither of us could ignore. But something important had changed. He was no longer asking me to protect him from the truth. That afternoon I spent nearly 3 hours cleaning the garage. I swept sawdust from beneath the shelves, moved my Christmas boxes back where I could reach them, returned Thomas's fishing rods to their old corner. Then I wiped down the workbench. Under months of dust, the wood slowly reappeared. Not new, not perfect, scarred, strong. I thought that was fitting. Near sunset, I pulled an old chair into the center of the garage and sat down. The space was quiet, completely quiet. No saws, no employees, no delivery trucks, no one calling it a workshop that belonged to someone else. Just my garage. For months I had imagined getting it back would feel like victory. It did not. It felt like relief. And underneath that relief was sadness for everything it had cost. But healing, I was learning, did not always feel triumphant. Sometimes it sounded like silence returning to a room. Sometimes it looked like an empty floor. And sometimes it was simply your grown son standing at the doorway of a place he once treated as his own, and finally returning the key. 4 months after Michael returned the garage key, Mason Ridge Interiors was still in business. Smaller, quieter, and according to Michael, finally honest about what it could afford to be. He had reduced his staff from 4 full-time employees to 2 full-time and 1 part-time installer. Caleb stayed. Marcus found work with a larger contractor but still helped Michael occasionally on weekends. Michael sold several expensive machines and stopped accepting jobs that required production capacity he no longer had. Instead of chasing every large contract that came his way, he focused on custom built-ins, smaller kitchen projects, and installation work. It was not the company he had imagined a year earlier, but it was still his company, and this time it was standing on something real. The city compliance case regarding my property was eventually resolved after the electrical corrections, structural repair, and removal of commercial operations were documented. The signature issue took longer. Michael followed his attorney's advice and admitted that he had inserted my signature image onto the owner authorization without asking me. I was interviewed again. So was he. I answered every question truthfully. I did not exaggerate. I did not minimize. Most importantly, I did not step in front of Michael and try to make the consequences disappear. That may have been the hardest thing I had ever done as his mother. For almost 40 years, when Michael fell, some part of me had automatically reached toward him. When he was 6, I cleaned his scraped knees. When he was 17, I drove across Richmond after midnight because his car battery died. When he was 26, Thomas and I helped him through a season when he could barely pay rent. Helping him had become instinct. But there was a difference between helping someone stand and making sure they never felt the ground when they fell. I had finally learned it. The city did not destroy his company. There were administrative and legal consequences, professional embarrassment, additional costs, and warnings, serious enough that Michael never again treated paperwork casually. That was enough. Life did not need to become a revenge story for justice to exist. Michael and I did not suddenly return to normal either. For several weeks our phone calls were awkward. Then they became easier. He stopped dropping by without calling. At first that felt strangely formal. Eventually I realized it was respect. Are you home around 4? Would Saturday work if Sophie wants to visit? Do you mind if I stop by after work? Small questions, simple questions, questions that should always have been asked. Jenna took longer. For a while she barely spoke to me. I understood why. Her household had changed too. Michael's reduced income meant postponing a kitchen renovation they had planned. They canceled a spring vacation. Jenna picked up additional responsibilities at the dental office. I knew she still believed I could have prevented some of their struggle by writing one check. But gradually something shifted. One Sunday afternoon she brought Sophie over. We were drinking coffee at my kitchen table when Jenna said, "I owe you an apology." I looked at her. For what? She stared into her cup. For saying you were choosing property over family. I waited. She continued. I was scared. I know. I kept looking at the garage as something available to us. The word us mattered. Not Michael. Us. I think we both did, she said. We talked about the house like it was part of our future. I felt the old ache again, but it was quieter now. I heard some of those conversations. I know. Michael had clearly told her. Jenna looked embarrassed. It sounds awful when I think about it now. It felt awful too. She nodded. I'm sorry. I believed her. That did not erase what had happened. But healing was beginning to teach me something else. Forgiveness did not require pretending the wound had never existed. Sometimes forgiveness simply meant you stopped demanding that the past become different. You accepted it, you learned from it, and then you watched carefully to see what people did next. That spring, I made changes to my estate plan, not because I wanted to punish Michael. Rebecca and I discussed that directly. I don't want my will to become a weapon, I told her. Then don't use it as one. So I didn't. I made decisions based on responsibility circumstances and what I believed would be wise, not on anger. More importantly, I stopped discussing my estate with Michael as though it were something he was waiting to receive. My house was not a future transaction. It was my home. If I sold it, that was my decision. If I stayed there another 20 years, that was my decision. If I eventually left something to my children, that would be a gift, not a delayed possession. The garage changed too. I considered parking my car there. Michael had been correct, I hated parking inside. Instead, I decided to make the space useful again, useful to me. I cleared one wall for storage and put my Christmas boxes on shelves low enough that I could reach them without asking anyone for help. Thomas's fishing rods returned to their corner. I bought 2 inexpensive cabinets for gardening supplies. And then one afternoon I found an old oakside table at an estate sale. The top was scratched. One leg was loose. Someone had painted it a terrible shade of green. I paid $20 for it. When I brought it home, I carried it into the garage and placed it beside Thomas's workbench. For several minutes I just looked at it. Then I smiled. Thomas had refinished furniture for years. I had watched him enough times to know the basics. So I bought sandpaper, wood glue, a can of stain, and I started. I was terrible at first. I sanded one corner too aggressively, used too much glue, got stain on the sleeve of a blouse I liked, but I enjoyed it. Not because I wanted to become a carpenter, because for the first time I was doing something in that garage that belonged entirely to me. About 3 weeks later, Michael came over. He called first. That still made me smile. When he arrived, I was standing beside the restored side table. He walked into the garage entrance, stopped, and looked at it. "You did that?" "I did." He ran one finger lightly across the top. "You sanded through the veneer right there." I frowned. "I know. And this joint could be tighter. Would you like to leave?" He laughed. A real laugh this time. "No." He looked at the table again. "Actually, it's pretty good. High praise." He walked toward Thomas's workbench. By then I had cleaned it thoroughly, but age was beginning to show. One drawer stuck. A lower shelf had started sagging. The wooden vice jaw was cracked. Michael crouched and examined it. "This needs work." "I know. I can fix it." The words came automatically. Then he stopped. I watched him catch himself. He stood. "Would you mind if I worked on it here?" My chest tightened. Such a small question. Months earlier I might not even have noticed it. Now I understood everything inside it. "Would you mind?" Not "I'm going to." Not "you aren't using it." Not "Dad would want me to." Not "it'll be mine eventually." Permission, he was asking. I looked at my son. "Yes," I said. "You can work on it here." Michael smiled. "Saturday." "That works." He arrived Saturday morning with a small toolbox. One toolbox. No vans, no employees, no machinery, just Michael. We spent most of the day working on Thomas's bench. Michael removed the damaged drawer slides. I cleaned old hardware. He reinforced the lower shelf. We argued mildly over whether to replace one cracked board. I wanted to keep it. Michael said it was too weak. "You sound like your father." That's because he would be right. Eventually we compromised. We reinforced the board instead of replacing it. Around noon, we sat on folding chairs eating sandwiches. Michael looked around the garage. "Dad would like this." "What, the way you've got it now?" "I think so." "He'd hate that green table. It isn't green anymore. He'd still know." I laughed. For a few minutes we sat quietly. Then Michael said, "I've been trying to figure out how to apologize properly." I looked at him. "You already apologized. Not for the whole thing." He put down his sandwich. I kept saying I was sorry for changing the garage or using the address. He rubbed his hands together. "But that wasn't the worst part." I waited. "The worst part was that I treated your love like permission." My throat tightened. Michael looked directly at me. "You helped me so many times that I started thinking help was something I was entitled to." He swallowed. "And when you finally said no, I didn't accept it. I tried to get around it. I said nothing." He continued. "I used Dad to make you feel guilty. That one hurt." "Yes. I knew talking about what he would have wanted would affect you." I looked toward Thomas's bench. I know. I'm ashamed of that. Michael's voice cracked slightly. I'm ashamed of the signature too. But the guilt thing, that feels worse now. I reached for his hand. Not because everything was forgotten, because he was finally seeing it clearly. I forgive you, I said. His eyes filled. But, he smiled weakly. There's a but. There has to be. He nodded. Forgiveness does not mean we go back to the way things were. I know. Trust comes back slower. I know that too. I squeezed his hand. And maybe that's okay. We finished the workbench just before sunset. Michael packed his tools. Then he carried the toolbox toward the driveway. I stayed inside the garage, running my hand across the repaired drawer. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps behind me. Michael had returned. He stopped at the open garage door. He did not walk inside. Instead, he knocked lightly against the wooden frame. Tap, tap. I turned. He smiled. Okay if I come in. I looked at him standing there. My son. Not perfect, not ruined, not magically transformed. Just a man who had finally learned that loving someone did not give him ownership of what belonged to them. And I realized I had learned something too. Being a mother did not require me to disappear little by little, so my children could occupy the spaces I surrendered. I was still here. My home was still mine. My choices were still mine. And love, when it was healthy, had room for the word no. I smiled. Yes, I said. You can come in. This time he waited until I answered. Then he stepped across the threshold. Kethuk Fan 15. Life Lesson. For most of my life, I believed generosity was one of the purest ways to show love. I still believe that. But generosity without boundaries can become something very different. When we give again and again without requiring respect, people can slowly stop seeing our help as a gift. They begin treating it like access. Then access becomes expectation, and expectation can become entitlement. Michael did not become entitled overnight. I helped create the pattern too. Every time something made me uncomfortable, I told myself a good mother should be patient. Every time he crossed a small boundary, I accepted an apology without requiring a real change. Eventually, my silence began sounding like permission. That was the lesson I had to learn at 68 years old. Saying no to someone you love is not the opposite of loving them. Sometimes it is the most loving thing you can do. My home did not belong to Michael because he might inherit it someday. My savings did not become family money simply because I could afford to help. My time, my property, and my decisions did not lose value because I was a mother. And Michael needed to learn that consequences were not cruelty. The moment I stopped rescuing him was painful for both of us. But it forced him to build a business he could actually sustain, apologize without excuses, and finally understand the difference between receiving generosity and possessing a right. We did not heal by pretending nothing happened. We healed because the rules changed, and because slowly our behavior changed with them. So I want to ask you something. If you had been standing in that driveway and a city inspector showed you a document with your own signature on it, a document you knew you had never signed, what would you have done? Would you have protected your child from the consequences, or would you have done what I did and told the truth? And after everything Michael did, would you have given him another chance? Tell me what you think in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your perspective, especially from those of you who have had to set difficult boundaries with adult children or other family members. And if stories about family betrayal, dignity, second chances, and finding the courage to stand up for yourself speak to you, subscribe and stay with me for the next story. Because sometimes the hardest person to convince that your life still belongs to you is someone you love. What Elena learned was not really about a garage. It was about the quiet line between love and self-erasure. Many parents spend their lives giving. They give time, money, second chances, spare rooms, childcare, forgiveness, and pieces of themselves they never expect to get back. And because that giving comes from love, it can become easy for everyone, including the parent, to forget that generosity is still a choice. It is not an obligation, it is not permission, and it is never ownership. Elena's greatest lesson was that saying no did not make her cold, selfish, or unloving. In fact, her refusal to keep rescuing Michael became one of the most loving things she had ever done for him. As long as she protected him from every consequence, he had no reason to change. But when she finally stood firm, he was forced to face the truth about his choices, his business, and the way he had treated his mother's kindness as something he was entitled to. Forgiveness did not mean pretending nothing happened. Trust did not return because Michael apologized once. Healing came slowly through accountability, changed behavior, and small acts of respect. Sometimes the most meaningful apology is not, "I'm sorry." Sometimes it is finally asking permission where you once assumed you had the right. And maybe that is the message worth carrying with us. You can love your family deeply without surrendering your dignity. You can help someone without becoming responsible for their entire life. You can forgive without reopening every door. And no matter your age, your home, your choices, your time, and your future still belong to you. If this story touched something in your own life, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with an adult child relative or someone you loved? Do you think Elena was right to stop protecting Michael from the consequences of what he had done? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional family stories about betrayal, dignity, hard-earned wisdom, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story.